In the tranquil village of St. Mary Mead, a cryptic invitation lands on Miss Jane Marple's doorstep, pulling her into a web of deception spun around a grand wedding at Haverford Manor. Why does Lady Beatrice, her old friend, hint at unease about the charming groom, Roland Haverford? What secrets lurk behind his sudden wealth and shadowy associates? As whispers of debts and a mysterious stranger at the Red Lion Inn surface, a chilling note with a pressed forget-me-not warns, beware the groom's shadow. With a bride's happiness and perhaps her safety at stake, Miss Marple's keen eye for human nature unravels a plot thick with greed, betrayal, and hidden motives. Can she piece together the clues before the wedding bells toll? Or will a sinister scheme triumph under the guise of celebration? Dive into a tale of suspense, where every smile hides a secret, and Miss Marple's quiet brilliance faces its greatest test yet. Chapter 1. The invitation. A revest late afternoon sun filtered through the lace curtains of Miss Marple's cozy sitting room in St. Mary Mead, casting delicate patterns across the polished oak table. The air carried the faint scent of lavender from the garden, mingling with the comforting aroma of freshly brewed tea. Miss Jane Marple, her silver hair neatly pinned and her eyes sharp behind her spectacles, sat in her favorite armchair, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically. A ball of soft blue wool rested in her lap, and a half-finished scarf lay draped over the armrest. It was a tranquil scene, one that had unfolded countless times in the quiet village, but today, a subtle shift in the air hinted at something new. The postman's bicycle bell jingled faintly outside, followed by the creak of the garden gate. Miss Marple's ears, attuned to the smallest disturbances, caught the sound instantly. She set her knitting aside, her fingers pausing mid-stitch, and glanced toward the window. A bit late for the post, she murmured to herself, her voice soft but laced with curiosity. She rose, smoothing her tweed skirt, and crossed to the door just as the brass letterbox clattered. On the mat lay a single envelope, its creamy vellum standing out against the worn rug. Miss Marple bent to retrieve it, her movements spry for a woman of her years. The envelope was heavy, embossed with an elegant cresta lion and rose intertwined and addressed in a looping, confident hand to Miss Jane Marple, Mead Cottage, St. Mary Mead. She turned it over, noting the wax seal, a deep crimson stamped with the same crest. "How very grand," she said with a small smile, her curiosity now fully awake. Back in her armchair, she slid the envelope with a silver letter opener, her movements deliberate. Inside was an invitation, its gold-etched borders framing an announcement that made her eyebrows lift ever so slightly. Lady Beatrice Haverford, an old friend from her school days at the Florence Academy for Young Ladies, was hosting the wedding of her niece, Clara Haverford, to a Mr. Roland Haverford, no relation. It seemed at Haverford Manor in the neighboring county of Downshire. The date was set for a fortnight hence, and the invitation cordially requested Miss Marple's presence at the celebration. Well, well, Miss Marple murmured, her eyes scanning the elegant script. Beatrice always did have a flair for the dramatic. She leaned back, the invitation resting in her lap, and allowed her mind to wander to Lady Beatrice, vivacious, opinionated, and fiercely loyal. Even in their youth, they had corresponded sporadically over the years, their letters filled with reminiscences of Italian summers, and the occasional tidbit of society gossip. But this invitation felt different, weighty with unspoken implications. As she sipped her tea, now cooling in its porcelain cup, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a small, folded note that had slipped from the envelope. It was written in a different hand, hurried and less polished, on plain paper that contrasted sharply with the invitation's opulence. She unfolded it carefully, her fingers brushing the slightly crumpled edge. The note read, "Dear Jane, I trust this finds you well. Clara's wedding is to be a joyous occasion. but I confess to a certain unease. Roland is charming, yet something about him eludes me. If your keen eye could grace us, I would be most relieved. Yours. Beatrice Marple's lips pursed, and a faint gleam appeared in her eyes. Unease, indeed, she said softly. Beatrice was not a woman given to flights of fancy. Her instincts, though less honed than Miss Marple's, were rarely mistaken. The note's brevity only deepened its significance. It was not a plea for help, not yet, but a quiet call to an old friend, whose knack for unraveling human nature was unmatched. She rose again, this time to fetch her writing desk from the corner. The village of St. Mary Mead was no stranger to secrets, and Miss Marple had unraveled her fair share of them: petty thefts, illicit affairs, even a murder or two. But a wedding at Haverford Manor, with its sprawling estate and tangled family history, promised a different kind of puzzle. She penned a brief reply, accepting the invitation with her usual graciousness, and added a line assuring Beatrice she would arrive promptly. As she sealed the letter, her mind was already turning over the name Roland Haverford. The next morning, St. Mary Mead was abuzz with its usual rhythm. The butcher's boy whistled as he made his deliveries, and Mrs. Price, the vicar's wife, was organizing a flower show with her characteristic fervor. Miss Marple, however, had other matters on her mind. She stepped out into the high street, her straw hat tilted against the sun, and made her way to the village shop. If anyone knew the latest gossip about the Haverfords, it would be Mrs. Bantry, who had a cousin in Downshire and an ear for every whisper within a 20-mile radius. The shop bell jingled as Miss Marple entered, and Mrs. Bantry, plump and cheerful behind the counter, greeted her with a wave. "Jane, I was just saying to Mr. Pock we haven't seen you in a day or two. Come for your usual wool. Or is it something sweeter today?" Her eyes twinkled, but Miss Marple caught the glint of curiosity beneath. "No wool today, Mrs. Bantry, Miss," Marple replied, her voice light. "Though I wouldn't say no to a tin of those lemon biscuits. I've had an invitation, you see, to a wedding at Haverford Manor. Clara Haverford, Lady Beatrice's niece, is to marry a Mr. Roland Haverford." Mrs. Bantry's eyebrows shot up, and she leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "Roland Haverford, you say? Now there's a name that's been making waves in Downshire. My cousin Mabel wrote to me only last week. He appeared out of nowhere, they say, with a fortune no one can quite account for. Charming as you please, mind you, but there's talk he's not all he seems." Miss Marple's expression remained serene, but her mind was cataloging every word. "Is that so? And what does Mabel make of him?" "Oh, Mabel's all aflutter, like half the village," Mrs. Bantry said, wrapping the biscuits in brown paper. "He's got a way with words, and those dark eyes don't hurt. But there's a story going around that he was seen at the Red Lion Inn with a gentleman nobody knew, a rough sort, not the kind you'd expect at Haverford Manor. And Clara, poor thing, seems head over heels, but Mabel says she's been looking pale lately." "Pale, you say?" Miss Marple's tone was gentle, encouraging more without pressing to hard. Mrs. Bantry nodded vigorously. "Nerves, Mabel reckons. Or perhaps she's sensed something off about her fiancé. Mind you, Lady Beatrice is all for the match, but then she's always been one for grand gestures. That manner's been in the family for generations, you know, and Clara's set to inherit a tidy sum." Miss Marple paid for the biscuits, her fingers lingering on the counter as she absorbed the information. "A tidy sum," she repeated thoughtfully. "Well, I shall see for myself soon enough, thank you, Mrs. Bantry. You've been most helpful." As she stepped back into the sunlight, Miss Marple's mind was already weaving a tapestry of possibilities. A mysterious fiancé, a nervous bride, and a cryptic note from an old friend. It was the sort of puzzle that suited her perfectly. She walked home at a leisurely pace, nodding to neighbors and pausing to admire Mrs. Price's roses. But her thoughts were elsewhere. Roland Haverford's sudden wealth and questionable associates were threads she intended to tug. Back at Mead Cottage, Miss Marple set about preparing for her journey. She opened her wardrobe, selecting a modest but elegant dress in dove gray, suitable for a wedding yet unobtrusive for observation. Her packing was meticulous, a few essentials, her knitting, and a small notebook she always carried for jotting down observations. As she folded her shawl, she thought of Clara Haverford, a young woman she had never met but could already picture bright, hopeful, yet perhaps unaware of the shadows gathering around her. That evening, as the village settled into its quiet rhythm, Miss Marple sat by her window, the invitation and Beatrice's note before her. She traced the crest on the envelope, her mind turning to the manor's history. Haverford Manor was a place of old money and older secrets. Its stone walls witnessed to generations of triumphs and scandals. Lady Beatrice had married into the family decades ago, bringing her own fortune and a fierce determination to preserve the Haverford legacy. Clara, as her niece, was the last of the line, and her marriage would shape the estate's future. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. It was young Tommy, the butcher's boy, with a parcel he'd forgotten to deliver earlier. "Sorry, Miss Marple," he said, his cheeks flushed. "It came with the Morning Post, but I got held up at the vicarage." She thanked him and took the parcel, a small, plain package wrapped in brown paper. There was no return address, only her name scrawled in a hurried hand. Inside was a single item, a pressed flower, a forget-me-not, tucked inside a folded piece of paper. The paper bore a single line: "Beware the groom's shadow." No signature, no explanation. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her expression remained calm. She held the flower to the light, its delicate blue petals stark against the paper. "How very curious," she said aloud, her voice steady but her mind racing. The note was a warning, but from whom? And what shadow did it refer to? Roland's past, his associates, or something else entirely? She placed the flower and note in her notebook, alongside her earlier jottings about Roland and the Red Lion Inn. The pieces were scattered, but Miss Marple was no stranger to puzzles with missing edges. She thought of her nephew Raymond, who often teased her about her village parallels, her knack for seeing the universal in the mundane. A charming stranger with a hidden agenda was not unlike Mr. Ellison, the St. Mary Mead grocer who'd swindled half the village before she caught him out. Roland Haverford, she suspected, was a larger fish in a grander pond, but the principles were the same. As night fell, Miss Marple lit a single candle and sat at her writing desk, composing a letter to her old friend Inspector Craddock, now retired, but with contacts in London. She inquired discreetly about Roland Haverford, mentioning his rumored wealth and the mysterious gentleman at the Red Lion. She kept her tone light, as if merely curious, but Craddock would know better. If there was a trail to follow, he'd point her to it. The following day, Miss Marple visited the vicarage to arrange for her neighbor, Miss Hartnell, to look after her garden in her absence. Miss Hartnell, ever eager for gossip, pressed for details about the wedding. "Haverford Manor, you say? Oh, Jane, you must tell me everything when you return. They say the groom's got half the county charmed, but I heard from my sister's friend that he's got debts in London. Mind you, it's only talk. Talk often has a grain of truth," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene. She filed away the mention of debts, another thread to weave into her growing tapestry. By midday, her bags were packed, and a taxi was arranged to take her to the station. The village seemed to watch her departure. its windows glinting in the sun as if bidding her luck. At the station, Miss Marple boarded the train to Downshire, her small suitcase stowed above her seat. The carriage was quiet, save for the rhythmic clatter of the wheels and the occasional rustle of a newspaper. She opened her notebook, reviewing her notes: Roland's wealth, the Red Lion stranger, Clara's pallor, Beatrice's unease, and now the cryptic forget-me-not. Each was a clue, small but significant, like the stitches in her knitting that formed a pattern only when viewed as a whole. As the train rolled through the countryside, Miss Marple gazed out at the rolling hills, her mind as sharp as ever. She thought of Clara, a young woman caught in a web she might not see. She thought of Roland, whose charm masked something darker. And she thought of Beatrice's note, a quiet plea for her oldest friend to bring clarity to chaos. The wedding was 2 weeks away, but Miss Marple knew that secrets, like weeds, grew quickly if left unchecked. The train slowed as it approached Downshire, the spires of Haverford Manor just visible in the distance. Miss Marple closed her notebook and tucked it into her handbag. She felt a familiar thrill, the quiet excitement of a puzzle waiting to be solved. Whatever Roland Haverford was hiding, she would find it. And with that thought, she stepped onto the platform, her eyes bright, and her resolve firm, ready to face the mystery that awaited at Haverford Manor. Chapter 2. Whispers in the Manor train from St. Mary Mead chugged through the rolling hills, its rhythmic clatter a soothing backdrop to Miss Jane Marple's thoughts. She sat by the window, her small suitcase tucked neatly beside her, the elegant cream-colored invitation from Lady Beatrice Haverford resting on her lap. The cryptic note she'd found tucked inside the invitation, a single line in hurried script. "Beware the shadows that smile," had set her mind alight with possibilities. It was unsigned, slipped between the folds as if meant to be found, but not claimed. Her fingers traced the embossed edges of the invitation, her sharp eyes scanning the countryside as if it might yield answers. The village gossip had painted Roland Haverford, Clara's fiancé, as a man of sudden wealth and charm. But Miss Marple knew better than to trust such polished surfaces. Charm, she mused, was often the varnish over secrets. As the train pulled into Haverford Station, a quaint platform framed by ivy-covered walls, Miss Marple gathered her things and stepped into the crisp autumn air. A driver in a smart navy uniform awaited her, holding a sign with her name in neat calligraphy. "Miss Marple, I'm Thomas. From the Manor. Lady Beatrice sent me to fetch you." His voice was polite, but clipped, his eyes darting to the side as if eager to leave the platform. "Thank you, Thomas," she replied, her tone warm but probing. "It's a lovely day for a drive, isn't it? Have you been with the Haverfords long?" Thomas hesitated, hoisting her suitcase into the sleek black car. "A year or so, ma'am. It's a fine place to work." His answer was too quick, too practiced, and Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw. She smiled benignly, settling into the back seat, her mind already cataloging his unease. The drive to Haverford Manor wound through lanes lined with ancient oaks, their leaves blazing red and gold. The manor itself loomed at the end of a gravel drive, a sprawling Georgian edifice with ivy crawling up its stone facade. Its windows glinted in the late afternoon sun, but there was a stillness to the place, as if it held its breath. Miss Marple's eyes swept over the scene, the perfectly trimmed hedges, the flurry of servants carrying crates of flowers, and the faint hum of activity that signaled a wedding in the making. Yet beneath it all, she sensed a current of disquiet, like a melody played just off-key. Lady Beatrice greeted her at the grand entrance, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her emerald green dress a nod to her aristocratic poise. "Jane, my dear," she exclaimed, clasping Miss Marple's hands. "It's been far too long. You're a saint to come all this way for Clara's wedding. It's my pleasure, Beatrice. Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. A wedding at Haverford Manor is not to be missed, and I'm eager to meet this Roland of hers. Lady Beatrice's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so brief it might have gone unnoticed by anyone less observant. Oh, Roland is quite the catch. Clara's besotted, and he's been nothing but devoted. Come, let me show you to your room. As they ascended the grand staircase, Miss Marple took in the manor's opulence, polished oak banisters, ancestral portraits with stern gazes, and chandeliers that cast prisms of light across the walls. Yet the air felt heavy, as if the house itself were guarding secrets. Servants bustled past, their footsteps muffled on the thick carpets, but their glances were guarded, their voices hushed. Miss Marple's keen ears caught snippets of conversation, not sure about him, and too good to be true, before the speakers noticed her and fell silent. Her room was a cozy haven, on the second floor, with a four-poster bed draped in rose-colored silk and a window overlooking the rose garden. Lady Beatrice lingered, chatting about the wedding plans, the orchids imported from London, the string quartet, the French chef crafting a 5-course feast. But Miss Marple noticed her friend's hands twisting the edge of her shawl, a nervous habit from their schoolgirl days. Beatrice, she said gently, is everything quite all right? You seem a touch preoccupied. Lady Beatrice laughed, a brittle sound. Oh, Jane, it's just the chaos of a wedding. You know how it is, endless details. And Clara's so particular about her dress. Roland's been a godsend, handling so much of it. She paused, then added, he's very modern, you know, not like the men we grew up with. Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene, but her mind alert. Modern was a word people used when they didn't quite know what else to say. She resolved to meet Roland Haverford as soon as possible. That evening, the manor hosted a welcome dinner for the early guests, a small but elegant affair in the dining hall. Crystal glasses sparkled under candlelight, and the scent of roasted pheasant mingled with the perfume of fresh lilies. Miss Marple, dressed in her best lavender frock, took her seat beside Clara, the bride-to-be. Clara was a vision, golden curls, framing a heart-shaped face, her blue eyes bright, but shadowed with a flicker of nerves. Her cream silk dress shimmered, but her fingers toyed with the stem of her wineglass, betraying her unease. Miss Marple, Clara said, her voice soft, but warm, Aunt Beatrice says you're the cleverest woman she knows. I'm so glad you're here. Oh, my dear, I'm just an old spinster who likes to observe, Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. But tell me about you and Roland. It must be thrilling to plan such a grand wedding. Clara's cheeks flushed, but her eyes darted to the head of the table, where Roland sat, deep in conversation with a portly gentleman in a tweed suit. Roland was striking tall, with dark hair swept back, his tailored suit accentuating a lean frame. His laughter was easy, his gestures confident, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes scanned the room, as if measuring every guest. Roland's wonderful, Clara said, her voice almost too earnest. He swept into my life like a whirlwind. He's traveled everywhere, knows everyone. I feel so lucky. Miss Marple patted her hand. He sounds remarkable. And how did you meet? Clara hesitated, her fingers tightening on the glass. At a charity ball in London, 6 months ago. He was so charming, and he seemed to understand me. We've been inseparable since. 6 months, Miss Marple thought. A whirlwind indeed. She made a mental note to inquire about this charity ball, but before she could press further, Roland stood, tapping his glass for attention. The room quieted, all eyes on him. Ladies and gentlemen, he began, his voice smooth as velvet. I want to thank you for joining us to celebrate Clara, the most extraordinary woman I've ever known. To love, to family, and to new beginnings. He raised his glass, his smile dazzling, and the guests echoed the toast. But Miss Marple's eyes were on the staff lining the walls. Mrs. Gibbs, the housekeeper, stood rigid, her lips a thin line, while a young maid twisted her apron, avoiding Roland's gaze. After dinner, as guests mingled over port and cigars, Miss Marple slipped away to explore the manor's grounds. The rose garden was a maze of fragrant blooms, their petals glowing under the moonlight. She moved quietly, her sensible shoes silent on the gravel paths, when she heard voices low, urgent, coming from a secluded arbor. She paused, her heart quickening, and peered through the foliage. Roland stood there, his back to her, facing a man she didn't recognize. The stranger was weary, with a sharp face and a trilby hat tilted low. His voice was a hiss, barely audible. You promised the deal would be done by now, Haverford. No more delays. Roland's tone was icy, a stark contrast to his earlier warmth. Keep your voice down, Victor. It's under control. The wedding's in 3 days, and then we're set. Victor's laugh was bitter. You'd better be right. I'm not taking the fall if this goes south. Miss Marple held her breath, her mind racing. A deal? What could Roland be hiding? And who was this Victor? She strained to hear more. But their voices dropped lower, and soon they parted. Roland, striding back toward the manor, Victor slipping into the shadows. She waited until the crunch of his footsteps faded, then made her way back to the house, her heart pounding with the thrill of discovery. The next morning, Miss Marple joined Mrs. Gibbs, the housekeeper, in the kitchen under the pretense of admiring the wedding preparations. The kitchen was a hive of activity, cooks chopping vegetables, maids polishing silver, but Mrs. Gibbs moved with a quiet authority, her gray hair pinned tightly beneath a cap. Miss Marple, armed with a cup of tea, struck up a conversation. It must be quite a task, managing a house this size for such an event, she said, her tone sympathetic. Mrs. Gibbs nodded, her hands busy folding napkins. It is, ma'am, but we manage. Mr. Roland's particular about everything being perfect for Miss Clara. He seems very attentive, Miss Marple said, stirring her tea. Has he been staying here long? Mrs. Gibbs's hands paused, just for a moment. A few months, ma'am. Came up from London with Miss Clara after they got engaged. He's always off to the city, though business, he says. Business? Miss Marple echoed, her voice light. What sort does he do? Mrs. Gibbs's lips pursed. Something to do with investments, I think. He doesn't talk much about it. Keeps to his study. Mostly, she glanced at Miss Marple, then away, as if regretting her words. Miss Marple sipped her tea, hiding her satisfaction. A locked study, frequent trips to London, and a mysterious deal with a man named Victor. The pieces were beginning to form a picture, though it was still blurred at the edges. She thanked Mrs. Gibbs and wandered to the library, where she found Clara poring over a guest list, her brow furrowed. Clara, dear, Miss Marple said, settling beside her. You look troubled. Is it the seating arrangements? Clara managed a weak smile. Oh, it's nothing, Miss Marple. Just nerves, I suppose. Roland says everything will be perfect, but I keep feeling like something's not right. Miss Marple's heart softened, but her mind sharpened. Weddings are overwhelming, my dear, but you're surrounded by people who care for you. If anything troubles you, you mustn't hesitate to speak. She paused, then added casually, I saw Roland in the garden last night, speaking with a gentleman. A friend of his, perhaps. Clara's eyes widened, then flickered with uncertainty. Oh, Probably one of his business associates. He meets so many people in London. I don't always keep up. Her voice was too quick. Her smile too forced. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern, but inwardly, she was piecing together the puzzle. Clara's unease, the staff's reticence, Roland's secretive meeting, they all pointed to something hidden, something dangerous. She excused herself and stepped into the corridor, where she nearly collided with a young maid, Lily, who was carrying a tray of linens. The girl's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling. "Are you all right, my dear?" Miss Marple asked, her voice soft but firm. Lily started, then nodded hastily. "Yes, ma'am. Just tired, is all." But her gaze darted toward the garden, where Roland's figure was visible, pacing near the arbor. Miss Marple followed her gaze, then smiled reassuringly. "You've all been working so hard. Tell me, Lily, do you ever see Mr. Roland with his business friends? He must have many visitors." Lily's face paled, and she clutched the tray tighter. "Sometimes, ma'am. There's one man comes late at night, never stays long. I shouldn't say more." She hurried off, leaving Miss Marple standing in the quiet corridor, her mind buzzing. That afternoon, Miss Marple took a walk through the Manor's east wing, where Roland's study was rumored to be. The hallway was lined with portraits of stern-faced Heverfords, their eyes seeming to follow her. She paused outside a heavy oak door, its brass handle gleaming. A faint clatter came from within, then silence. She knocked lightly, but there was no answer. Testing the handle, she found it locked, as Mrs. Gibbs had implied. A locked study, she thought, was rarely innocent. As she turned to leave, she heard footsteps approaching, quick, purposeful. She stepped into an alcove, pulling her shawl close, and watched as Roland emerged from a side door, his face set in a frown. He glanced around, then unlocked the study and slipped inside. Miss Marple waited, counting the seconds, but he didn't reemerge. She made a mental note to find a way into that room, certain it held answers. Dinner that evening was a tense affair, the air thick with unspoken words. Roland was charming as ever, regaling the guests with tales of his travels in Italy. But Miss Marple noticed Clara's forced laughter, the way her eyes lingered on him with a mix of adoration and doubt. Lady Beatrice, too, seemed distracted, her smiles not reaching her eyes. After dessert, Miss Marple excused herself early, claiming fatigue, but instead lingered in the shadows of the great hall, watching. It was then she saw Mrs. Gibbs slip a note to one of the footmen, her expression furtive. The footman glanced at it, then tucked it into his pocket and headed toward the garden. Miss Marple followed at a distance, her heart racing with the thrill of the chase. The footman met a figure at the edge of the rose garden. Victor, she realized, recognizing his sharp features under the moonlight. The footman handed him the note, and Victor read it quickly before crumpling it and slipping away. Miss Marple's mind raced. Was Mrs. Gibbs involved, or merely a messenger? She couldn't confront her, yet not without more evidence. Instead, she returned to her room, her notebook open on the desk. She sketched Victor's face from memory, capturing the angular jaw, the shadowed eyes. Below it, she wrote, "Deal. Victor." Locked study, Clara's nerves. Mrs. Gibbs's note. The pieces were scattered, but they were hers to assemble. As she closed the notebook, a soft knock came at her door. It was Clara, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly. "Miss Marple," she whispered, "I don't know why, but I'm frightened. Roland's been so kind, but there's something he's not telling me. Am I being foolish?" Miss Marple took her hand, her voice steady. "Not foolish, my dear. Trust your instincts, and know that I'm here, watching." We'll sort this out together. Clara nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude, and left. Miss Marple sat back, her knitting needles clicking softly in the quiet room. The manor was a web of secrets, and Roland Haverford was at its center. But she was Miss Jane Marple, and no web was too tangled for her to unravel. She smiled to herself, satisfied with her first lead, but hungry for more. The cryptic note's warning echoing in her mind. Beware the shadows that smile. Chapter 3. The locked, steady late afternoon sun filtered through the heavy damask curtains of Haverford Manor, casting a golden glow across the polished mahogany floors. Miss Jane Marple, seated primly in a cushioned armchair in the drawing room, sipped her tea with an air of serene attentiveness. Round her, the hum of wedding preparations filled the air, servants bustling with trays of crystal glassware, florists arranging cascades of white roses, and Clara, the bride-to-be, flitting nervously between her aunt, Lady Beatrice, and a harried seamstress pinning her gown. To an outsider, Miss Marple might have seemed just another guest, her soft gray hair and gentle smile blending seamlessly into the genteel chaos. But her sharp eyes missed nothing, darting from the anxious twitch of Clara's fingers to the fleeting frown of a footman who lingered too long by the door. The previous night's discovery, the whispered argument between Roland Haverford and a shadowy stranger in the garden, had set her mind alight. The words deal and hidden echoed in her memory, their ambiguity a puzzle she was determined to solve. Roland, with his polished charm and easy smile, was the picture of a perfect groom. But Miss Marple knew better than to trust surfaces. St. Mary Mead had taught her that secrets often hid behind the brightest facades, and Haverford Manor was no exception. As the tea party commenced, Miss Marple's attention settled on Clara's younger brother, Timothy, a lanky boy of 12 with a mop of chestnut curls and an insatiable curiosity that reminded her of her nephew Raymond's boyhood. Timothy hovered near the refreshment table, his eyes darting between a plate of scones and the adults' conversations. Miss Marple caught his gaze and offered a warm smile, patting the seat beside her. "Timothy, dear, do come and tell me about the manor. It's such a grand old place, isn't it?" Timothy hesitated, then shuffled over, his gangly limbs betraying his eagerness. "It's all right, I suppose," he said, plopping down with a scone in hand. "Bit creaky, though. And Roland's always locking things up." Double quotes. Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted slightly, her interest peaked. "Locking things up? How curious. Does he guard his treasures like a dragon, then?" Timothy grinned, crumbs dusting his chin. "Sort of. His study's always locked. Nobody's allowed in, not even Clara. Says it's for business, but I think he's hiding something. I saw him sneak in there last night with a funny look on his face." Miss Marple's knitting needles, which had been clicking softly in her lap, paused. "A funny look, you say? Well, that's intriguing. Perhaps he's planning a surprise for Clara." Her tone was light, but her mind was already turning over possibilities. A locked study was a classic sign of something amiss her years in. St. Mary Mead had taught her that men who locked doors often had more to hide than business papers. Timothy leaned closer, lowering his voice. "I bet it's something dodgy. I tried peeking through the keyhole once, but it's too dark. And he keeps the key on him all the time, in his waistcoat pocket." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "You're quite the detective, Timothy. But keyholes are tricky things. Perhaps there's another way to learn more about this mysterious study." She patted his hand, her mind already formulating a plan. Timothy's curiosity was a gift, and she intended to use it carefully. The tea party progressed with the usual flurry of polite chatter, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere. She observed Roland as he moved through the room, his tailored suit immaculate, his smile just a touch too practiced. When he excused himself to take a telephone call, she noted the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hand lingered on the door frame as if reluctant to leave the room unwatched. Lady Beatrice, meanwhile, was distracted, fussing over a misplaced centerpiece. Her usual composure frayed by the wedding's demands. This, Miss Marple decided, was her moment. She leaned toward Timothy, who was now demolishing a second scone. "Timothy, dear, I wonder if you might help an old lady with a small task. I've misplaced my spectacles, silly me, and I think they might have fallen near the study door when I passed by earlier. Could you check for me and perhaps see if that door is as locked as you say?" Timothy's eyes lit up with mischief. "You want me to snoop, don't you?" Miss Marple chuckled softly. "I want you to be helpful, dear. But if you happen to notice anything interesting, well, I'm all ears." The boy needed no further encouragement. He slipped away from the table, weaving through the guests with the agility of youth. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles moving rhythmically as she kept one eye on the room. Lady Beatrice was now engaged in a heated discussion with the florist, and the other guests were too absorbed in their cucumber sandwiches to notice Timothy's absence. Minutes later, Timothy returned, his face flushed with excitement. He slid into the seat beside her, his voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't find your spectacles, Miss Marple, but I got something better." He opened his palm to reveal a small brass key, its surface gleaming faintly in the lamplight. It was in Roland's coat pocket, the one he left on the hall rack. "I only borrowed it for a bit." Miss Marple's heart quickened, but her expression remained serene. "Oh, Timothy, you are clever, but we must be careful with borrowed things. Perhaps I'll take a quick look myself, just to be sure my spectacles aren't there. You'll keep watch, won't you?" Timothy nodded eagerly, clearly thrilled to be part of the adventure. Miss Marple tucked the key into her sleeve, her movements as discreet as a cat's. She excused herself from the tea party, citing a need for fresh air, and made her way toward the west wing, where Roland's study was tucked behind a heavy oak door. The corridor was quiet, save for the distant clink of teacups and the murmur of voices from the drawing room. Miss Marple's sensible shoes made no sound on the thick carpet as she approached the study. She glanced over her shoulder, ensuring she was alone, then slipped the key into the lock. It turned with a satisfying click, and the door swung open, revealing a room steeped in shadow. The study was a masculine domain, all dark wood and leather, with a faint scent of tobacco and old books. A large desk dominated the space, its surface cluttered with papers, an inkstand, and a silver cigarette case. Heavy curtains blocked most of the daylight, and a single lamp cast a pool of light across the desk. Miss Marple closed the door softly behind her and moved with purpose, her eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. Her attention was drawn to a bookshelf that seemed slightly askew, its edge not quite flush with the wall. She approached it, her fingers brushing the spines of leather-bound volumes, mostly dry tomes on finance and estate management. The one title, The Art of Deception, caught her eye with grim irony. She tugged gently at the shelf, and to her surprise, it shifted, revealing a narrow compartment behind it. Inside was a small ledger, its cover worn, but its pages crisp. Miss Marple opened it carefully, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the entries. The handwriting was meticulous, but the content was cryptic columns of numbers paired with initials and dates, none of which made immediate sense. She flipped to a later page and found a folded photograph tucked between the leaves. It showed Roland, younger and less polished, standing beside a woman with sharp features and a guarded smile. The back of the photograph bore a single word, Eleanor. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. Eleanor. The name rang no immediate bells, but the photograph was a clue, a thread to tug. She slipped it into her pocket, her mind racing. The ledger, too, was too valuable to leave behind, but taking it would risk alerting Roland. Instead, she memorized a few key entries, her mind trained by years of solving crossword puzzles and deciphering village gossip. As she closed the ledger, a faint creak from the corridor froze her in place. Footsteps slow, deliberate approached the door. Miss Marple's heart thudded, but her composure held. She replaced the ledger, pushed the bookshelf back into place, and scanned the room for another clue she could take without rousing suspicion. Her eyes landed on a monogrammed handkerchief tucked carelessly beneath a stack of papers. The initials RH were embroidered in bold red thread, but the fabric bore a faint stained lipstick, perhaps, or something more sinister. She slipped it into her sleeve just as the footsteps grew louder. The door handle rattled. Miss Marple moved swiftly to the window, pretending to adjust the curtain as the door swung open. Roland stood in the threshold, his expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. Miss Marple, what are you doing here? Oh, Mr. Haverford, you startled me, she said, her voice light and flustered. I'm afraid I got a bit turned around looking for the powder room. These old manors are such mazes, aren't they? I saw the door ajar and thought I'd take a peek. Such a lovely study you have. Roland's eyes narrowed, but his smile remained in place. The door was ajar. That's odd. I always keep it locked. He stepped inside, his gaze sweeping the room as if checking for disturbances. Miss Marple's heart pounded, but her face betrayed nothing. Oh, perhaps it wasn't quite shut. My mistake. I'll leave you to your work. Dear boy, I'm sure you have much to do before the wedding. She moved toward the door, her steps deliberate but unhurried. Roland hesitated, then nodded. Of course. Let me show you back to the drawing room. As they walked, Miss Marple chatted amiably about the weather and the beauty of the manor's gardens, her mind elsewhere. The ledger's codes, the photograph, the handkerchief, each was a piece of a larger puzzle, and she was determined to fit them together. Back in her room, she locked the door and sat at the small writing desk, spreading her clues before her. The photograph of Roland and the mysterious Eleanor stared up at her, a silent challenge. She took out her notebook and began to sketch the woman's face, her pencil capturing the sharp cheekbones and guarded eyes. The handkerchief, with its faint stain, lay beside it, a tangible link to Roland's secrets. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting needles resuming their quiet rhythm as her mind worked. The locked study had yielded its first secrets, but she knew there was more to uncover. Roland's polished exterior was cracking, and she was one step closer to the truth. The evening settled over Haverford Manor, the air thick with the scent of roses and the promise of revelations. Miss Marple smiled to herself, content with her progress, but already planning her next move. The wedding was days away, and time was short, but she had faced tighter deadlines in St. Mary Mead. With Timothy's help and her own sharp instincts, she would unravel Roland's secrets and ensure Clara's future was safe. Chapter 4. The village gossip. Morning sun cast a golden glow over the rolling hills surrounding Haverford Manor, its light filtering through the mist that clung to the village of Ashbury Vale. Below, Miss Jane Marple, clad in her sensible tweed skirt and a lavender cardigan, stepped off the gravel path from the manor and onto the cobblestone street of the village. Her eyes, sharp as ever behind her spectacles, took in the quaint scene. Ivy-clad cottages, a butcher's shop with a red and white awning, and the post office with its faded signs swinging gently in the breeze. The air carried the scent of fresh bread from the bakery and the faint tang of coal smoke. To an outsider, Ashbury Vale was a postcard of rural charm. But Miss Marple knew better. Villages like this thrived on secrets, whispered over teacups and behind closed doors. Her mission today was clear: to sift through the village's gossip, that rich tapestry of half-truths and keen observations, to uncover more about Roland Haverford's shadowy dealings. The cryptic ledger she'd glimpsed in his locked study, with its coded entries and mysterious photograph, had set her mind buzzing. The monogrammed handkerchief, now tucked safely in her handbag, was a tangible clue, but she needed more threads to weave into the pattern she sensed forming. Roland's polished charm and sudden wealth were too perfect, too convenient, and Miss Marple had long learned to distrust perfection. She began at the village's heart, the post office, a small stone building with a bell that jingled as she pushed open the door. Inside, the air was musty, redolent of ink and old paper. Behind the counter stood Mrs. Agnes Phipps, the retired postmistress, now assisting her nephew, who had taken over the role. Mrs. Phipps, with her silver hair pinned in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing, was exactly the sort of person Miss Marple sought. In St. Mary Mead, such women were the unofficial archivists of village life, and Miss Marple had no doubt Ashbury Vale was the same. "Good morning, Mrs. Phipps," Miss Marple said brightly, adjusting her gloves. "I'm staying up at the manor for dear Clara's wedding, and I thought I'd post a letter to my nephew. Such a charming village you have here." Mrs. Phipps's lips twitched into a smile, though her eyes were wary. "Thank you, miss. Ashbury Vale's a quiet place, though we've had more excitement lately with all the comings and goings at the manor." Her tone invited questions, and Miss Marple obliged. "Oh, yes. The wedding preparations must keep everyone busy," she said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "I imagine you see quite a bit from behind this counter. All those letters and packages, such a window into people's lives." Mrs. Phipps's eyes gleamed, and she lowered her voice. "You've no idea, miss. Folks think the post is just stamps and parcels, but it's the lifeblood of gossip. Take Mr. Haverford. Now, ever since he arrived, we've had a steady stream of letters for him, thick ones, from London, and parcels, too. Some with a queer seal I've not seen before, miss." Marple's heart quickened, but her face remained placid. "A seal, you say? How intriguing. Perhaps a family crest, not likely," Mrs. Phipps said, shaking her head. "It's an odd thing, like a crescent moon with a dagger through it. Not the sort of mark you'd expect from a gentleman. And always from the same address in London, someplace called Raven's Court. Sounds a bit sinister to me." "Fascinating," Miss Marple murmured, her mind already connecting the seal to the ledger's coded entries. "And these parcels, do they come often?" "Every week, like clockwork," Mrs. Phipps replied, warming to her topic. "Mind you, Mr. Haverford's always quick to collect them himself. Doesn't trust the delivery boy, I reckon. Last one came just yesterday, and he was here before the bell stopped ringing." Miss Marple nodded, filing away the name Raven's Court and the image of the crescent dagger seal. "Well, he must be a busy man, with the wedding so near, I suppose. Clara's family keeps you busy, too, with all the invitations and such." "Oh, we've sent out dozens of those fancy envelopes," Mrs. Phipps said. "But it's the manor staff who keep me chatting. That housekeeper, Mrs. Dobbs, she's in here often, muttering about how Mr. Haverford's changed the place. Says he's got big plans for after the wedding, talk of investments and such. Sounds grand, but I don't know. There's something about him that doesn't sit right." Miss Marple smiled, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was racing. "Investments, you say? How modern. I suppose a man like Mr. Haverford must have many connections in London." Mrs. Phipps sniffed. "Connections, maybe. but not the sort you'd invite to tea. There's talk he's mixed up with some shady types. Mind you, I don't spread tales, but when you see a man getting packages from places like Raven's Court, you wonder. The bell jingled, signaling another customer, and Miss Marple took her leave, slipping her unposted letter back into her handbag. As she stepped into the street, she felt a quiet thrill. The crescent-tanned dagger seal was a solid lead, and Raven's Court sounded like a place worth investigating. But first, she had other stops to make. Her next destination was the village. Shop, a cluttered emporium stocked with everything from tin biscuits to sewing needles. The shopkeeper, Mr. Grayson, was a weary man with a penchant for storytelling, and Miss Marple found him sweeping the stoop as she approached. "Good day, Mr. Grayson," she called, her voice warm. "I'm up from St. Mary Mead, visiting for the Haverford wedding. I thought I'd pop in for some embroidery thread. My needlework keeps me occupied during these busy events." Mr. Grayson's face lit up. "Welcome, welcome. We've got plenty of thread, cotton, silk, you name it. Though I wager you're here for more than thread, eh? Everyone's talking about that wedding." Miss Marple chuckled, stepping inside the shop, where shelves groaned under the weight of goods. "Oh, I do love a good wedding, but they do stir up the village, don't they? I hear Mr. Haverford's quite the catch." Mr. Grayson snorted, setting his broom aside. "Catch? Maybe. But some say he's more trouble than he's worth. Been in here a few times, buying odd things, stationery, sealing wax. Even a lock for that study of his. Acts like he's lord of the manor already. Sealing wax." Miss Marple's tone was casual, but her interest sharpened. "How curious. Perhaps he's particular about his correspondence." "Particular's one word for it," Mr. Grayson said, lowering his voice as a customer browsed nearby. He bought a whole stock of red wax, the kind with a heavy scent. Said it was for business, but who seals letters like that these days? And he's always asking about the post schedule, like he's expecting something urgent. Miss Marple nodded, her fingers tracing a spool of blue thread. He must be a man with many responsibilities. I suppose Clara's lucky to have such an enterprising fiancé. Mr. Grayson shrugged. Maybe, but there's talk he's pushing her to marry quick. The seamstress, Miss Lucy Tate, was in here yesterday, nearly in tears. Said Mr. Haverford's been hounding her to finish Clara's dress early, like he can't wait another day. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly, though her smile remained. Poor Miss Tate. Weddings are stressful enough without extra pressure. I must visit her. Perhaps I can offer some advice on lace patterns. She left the shop with a small packet of thread and a growing sense of unease. Roland's urgency to marry Clara, combined with the mysterious packages and sealing wax, suggested a man with a timetable and secrets to protect. Miss Lucy Tate, the seamstress, was her next target. If anyone knew Clara's state of mind, it would be the woman stitching her wedding dress. The seamstress's cottage was a short walk down a lane lined with wildflowers, its windows adorned with lace curtains that spoke of her trade. Miss Marple knocked, and the door opened to reveal Lucy Tate, a young woman with delicate features and eyes shadowed with worry. Her hands were dusted with chalk, and a pincushion hung from her wrist. "Miss Tate, I'm Jane Marple, a guest at the manor, Miss," Marple said, her tone gentle. "I heard you're working on Clara's dress, and I couldn't resist stopping by. I do so admire fine needlework." Lucy's face softened, though her smile was strained. "That's kind of you, Miss Marple. Would you like to come in? I'm just finishing a hem, but I could use a break." Inside, the cottage was a haven of fabric and thread, with Clara's wedding dress displayed on a mannequin, a vision of ivory silk and intricate lace. Miss Marple admired it openly, her compliments. easing Lucy's tension. "It's exquisite," Miss Marple said, touching the delicate veil. "Clara must be thrilled. Though I imagine it's quite a task, with the wedding so close." Lucy sighed, sinking into a chair. "It is. Mr. Haverford's been insistent. He wants the dress done by tomorrow. Says it's bad luck to delay. But Clara, she's so sweet. Just smiles and says to do my best. I don't know how she stays so calm." Miss Marple's eyes softened, sensing an opening. "Weddings can be overwhelming, can't they? I remember my niece's such a flurry." Has Clara seemed herself? With all this rush, Lucy hesitated, her fingers twisting a scrap of fabric. "She's quieter than I expected. I've known her since we were girls, and she's always been so lively. But yesterday, when I fitted her, she seemed distracted, kept looking out the window, like she was waiting for something. And Mr. Haverford, he was here, pacing, asking her to sign some papers. I don't know what they were, but she didn't look happy about it." "Papers?" Miss Marple's voice was light, but her mind seized on the detail. "Perhaps wedding arrangements, maybe," Lucy said, her voice dropping. "But he was so sharp with her, not like a man in love. I shouldn't say, but it felt wrong. And then there's that woman who came by yesterday, asking about Clara's dress. Said she was a cousin, but I've never seen her before." Miss Marple's pulse quickened. "A cousin? How curious. Did she give a name? Eleanor, I think," Lucy said, frowning. "Tall, dark hair, dressed a bit old-fashioned. She wanted to know every detail about the dress, even the veil. I thought it was odd, but she said it was for a surprise. I didn't tell her much. Clara's private about these things." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts racing to the monogrammed handkerchief and the possibility that this Eleanor was linked to Roland's secrets. "You've done well to be discreet, my dear. Clara's lucky to have such a thoughtful friend." Lucy blushed, but her worry lingered. "I just want her to be happy. She deserves better than all this rushing about." As Miss Marple left the cottage, the pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Roland's secretive mail, the crescent-end dagger seal, and now this mysterious Eleanor. It all pointed to a scheme, one that hinged on Clara's marriage. The papers Lucy mentioned could be a prenuptial agreement or something more sinister, perhaps tied to the ledger's coded entries. And Eleanor's interest in the dress suggested she was more than a curious cousin. The sun was dipping low as Miss Marple made her way back to the manor. Her steps brisk despite the ache in her knees. She passed the village green, where children played and a group of women chatted by the well. Their voices carried snippets of gossip. Roland's fine suits, his late-night rides to the station, the way he avoided the vicar's questions. Miss Marple listened without seeming to, her mind cataloging each detail like stitches in a tapestry. Dot at the manor's gates, she paused, glancing back at Ashbury Vale. The village had given her what she needed, a web of clues, each thread leading back to Roland Haverford. Raven's Court, the sealed packages, Eleanor's sudden appearance, and Clara's unease. It was a pattern, one Miss Marple recognized from her years of unraveling human nature. Roland was no mere fortune hunter. His plans were calculated, perhaps dangerous. She adjusted her hat, a satisfied smile playing on her lips. The village had spoken, and she had listened. Now, it was time to return to the manor and watch Roland closely. The wedding was days away, and she sensed the truth was within reach. With her notebook tucked in her handbag and her mind alight with possibilities, Miss Marple stepped through the gates, ready for the next move in this intricate game. Chapter 5. A midnight encounter. The moon hung low over Haverford Manor, casting a silvery glow across the sprawling lawns and tangled rose gardens. The air was heavy with the scent of blooming jasmine and a faint breeze stirred the curtains of Miss Jane Marple's guest room. Sleep eluded her, as it often did when her mind buzzed with the faint hum of suspicion. The events of the past few days, Roland Haverford's polished charm, the cryptic ledger, the nervous glances of the staff had woven a tapestry of unease that she couldn't ignore. She sat up in bed, her thin frame wrapped in a soft shawl, and glanced at the small clock on the bedside table. midnight. The manor was silent, save for the occasional creak of old wood settling into the night. Miss Marple's instincts, honed by years of observing human nature in the quiet lanes of St. Mary Mead, told her that secrets rarely kept to daylight hours. If there was something to uncover about Roland Haverford, it was likely to reveal itself under the cover of darkness. She slipped on her sturdy shoes, adjusted her shawl, and picked up her small notebook, its pages already dotted with her neat, precise handwriting. With a quiet determination, she stepped into the corridor, her movements as soft as a cat's. The manor's hallways were a labyrinth of polished oak and faded tapestries, lit only by the dim glow of wall sconces. Miss Marple moved with purpose, her eyes sharp despite the late hour. She had no specific destination in mind, only a sense that the night might yield answers where the day had offered only questions. As she descended the grand staircase, she paused, her hand resting lightly on the banister. A faint sound of muffled voice, perhaps drifted from the direction of the garden doors. Her heart quickened, not with fear, but with the thrill of discovery. She glided toward the glass-paneled doors that led to the terrace, her steps silent on the thick carpet. The doors were slightly ajar, and a cool draft carried the scent of damp earth. Peering through the gap, she saw two figures standing near the ornamental fountain, their silhouettes stark against the moonlit gravel path. One was unmistakably Roland Haverford, his tall frame and confident posture recognizable even in shadow. The other was a stranger, shorter and warier, with a restless energy that set Miss Marple's nerves on edge. She edged closer, careful to stay hidden behind the heavy velvet drapes. Their voices were low, but the night was still, and Miss Marple's hearing, like her mind, was sharper than most assumed of a woman her age. She strained to catch their words, her fingers tightening around her notebook. The final payment must be made before the wedding, the stranger said, his voice clipped and urgent. No delays, Haverford. You know what's at stake. Roland's tone was smooth, almost amused, but Miss Marple detected a thread of tension beneath it. You worry too much, Victor. Everything is in place. Clara's inheritance is as good as mine. Once the vows are spoken, we'll have more than enough to settle all accounts. Miss Marple's lips pursed. Victor. The name slotted into her memory like a puzzle piece. She scribbled it in her notebook, her pencil moving swiftly in the dark. The mention of Clara's inheritance confirmed her suspicions. Roland's interest in the young bride-to-be was not born of love, but of something far colder. She leaned closer, her breath shallow, as the conversation continued. And the package, Victor pressed, his voice dropping lower. You've secured it. Roland patted his coat pocket, a faint rustle betraying the presence of something small and concealed. Right here, delivered as promised. You'll have it once the funds clear. Victor's silhouette shifted, as if he were about to protest, but Roland cut him off. Enough. We've been over this. You'll get what's owed, but not a moment sooner. Now go before someone sees us. Victor hesitated, then turned abruptly, his boots crunching on the gravel as he disappeared into the shadows of the rose garden. Roland lingered by the fountain, his head tilted as if listening for any sign of pursuit. Miss Marple held her breath, her heart pounding in the stillness. She was no stranger to danger, but the weight of Roland's secrets felt heavier now, tangible in the night air. As Roland turned back toward the manor, Miss Marple slipped behind a tall hedge, its prickly leaves brushing her shawl. She waited, counting the seconds until his footsteps faded into the house. Only then did she exhale, her mind racing. The package, the payment, the mention of Clara's inheritance, it was all connected. A web of deceit with Roland at its center. But who was Victor, and what was in that package? Her curiosity burned brighter than ever, and she resolved to find out as she stepped cautiously onto the gravel path, her eyes scanning the ground for any clue Victor might have left behind. The moonlight revealed little, just the faint imprint of boots in the soft earth near the fountain. She knelt, her knees protesting slightly, and examined the tracks. They were fresh, leading toward a narrow gate at the edge of the garden. She considered following, but thought better of it. Victor was long gone, and the night was growing colder. Instead, she turned her attention to the fountain, its stone basin gleaming faintly. Something caught her eye, a glint of metal near the base of the fountain, half hidden by a cluster of ivy. She reached down, her fingers brushing against something small and cold. It was a cigarette case, silver and engraved with a swirling monogram, VC Victor Crane, perhaps. She turned it over in her hands, noting its weight and the faint smell of tobacco clinging to it. A careless mistake, she thought, and one that might prove useful. She tucked it into her shawl, her mind already cataloging its significance. Returning to the manor, Miss Marple took a different route, skirting the main entrance to avoid detection. She passed through the servants' corridor, where a single lamp flickered, casting long shadows. As she neared the kitchen, she heard a soft clatter. A pan, perhaps, dropped in haste. She paused, her instincts flaring. The kitchen should have been empty at this hour. She crept closer, peering through the half-opened door. Inside, a young maid, Lily, Miss Marple recalled, with her quick smile and nervous hands, was frantically scrubbing a glass. Her face pale, she jumped when she saw Miss Marple, nearly dropping the glass again. "Oh, Miss Marple, you startled me," Lily gasped, her voice trembling. I couldn't sleep, so I thought I'd tidy up." Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind remained sharp. "No need to be frightened, my dear," she said gently, stepping into the kitchen. "It's only me, taking a little walk. The night air helps clear the mind, don't you find?" Lily nodded, her hands still clutching the glass. Miss Marple noted the girl's unease, the way her eyes darted toward the door. "You've been working hard for the wedding, haven't you?" Miss Marple continued, her tone conversational but probing. "It must be difficult, with so many guests and such unusual visitors." Lily's cheeks flushed. "Unusual? I don't know what you mean, ma'am." "Oh, just the comings and goings," Miss Marple said airily, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "I saw Mr. Haverford out in the garden just now, speaking with a man, a friend of his, perhaps." Lily's hands stilled, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she might bolt, but the girl only shook her head. "I don't know, ma'am. Mr. Haverford, he keeps to himself, mostly. I don't ask questions." "Of course not," Miss Marple said, her smile warm but her eyes keen. "But you're a clever girl, Lily. You notice things. If you ever feel there's something worth mentioning, you know where to find me." Lily nodded, her expression a mix of relief and fear. Miss Marple patted her arm and turned to leave, satisfied that the seed had been planted. Lily might not speak now, but fear had a way of loosening tongues, and Miss Marple was patient. Back in her room, she locked the door and sat at the small writing desk, her notebook open before her. She sketched the cigarette case from memory, capturing the monogram's elegant loops. Below it, she wrote, "Victor Crane, package, final payment, Clara's inheritance. The words stared back at her, stark and damning. She closed the notebook and hid the cigarette case in her knitting bag beneath a tangle of wool. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As she prepared for bed, her thoughts turned to Roland. His charm, his confidence, his carefully crafted persona was all too perfect, like a play rehearsed to the last line. But Miss Marple had seen such performances before, in St. Mary Mead and beyond. Men like Roland always underestimated women, like her, mistaking age for frailty, quietness for ignorance. She smiled faintly, settling into her pillows. Let him think her harmless. It would make her task all the easier. The night stretched on, and Miss Marple drifted into a light sleep, her dreams filled with moonlit gardens and whispered secrets. She awoke just before dawn, her mind clear and her resolve stronger than ever. The cigarette case, Victor's name, the package, they were pieces of a larger puzzle, and she was determined to see it whole. The wedding was only days away, and time was short. But Miss Marple had never been one to rush. Truth, like a well-tended garden, required patience to bloom. She rose and dressed, her movements brisk despite the late hour of her adventure. As she pinned her hat in place, she glanced at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes, bright and unyielding, held the spark of a woman who thrived on unraveling mysteries. Roland Haverford might think himself clever, but he had yet to meet his match. The day ahead promised new opportunities, perhaps a chat with Clara, or a closer look at the garden gate where Victor had vanished. Miss Marple tucked her notebook into her pocket and stepped into the corridor, ready to face whatever secrets the manor held. The game, as her old friend Sir Henry Clithering might say, was afoot. Chapter 6. The disguised guest grand ballroom of Haverford Manor glowed under the chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering light across the polished oak floors. The pre-wedding ball was in full swing, a kaleidoscope of silk gowns, starched shirts, and the clink of champagne flutes. The air buzzed with laughter, the hum of violins, and the faint scent of roses from the garden wafting through open windows. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a cushioned chair near the edge of the dance floor, observed the scene with her characteristic blend of quiet amusement and razor-sharp attention. Her lavender dress, modest yet impeccably tailored, allowed her to blend into the crowd, her silver hair catching the light as she tilted her head to better hear a snatch of conversation. The room was a tapestry of human nature, and Miss Marple was its keenest weaver. She noted the way Clara, the bride-to-be, floated through the crowd, her smile radiant, but her eyes darting nervously toward her fiancé, Roland Haverford. Roland, handsome in his tailored evening suit, moved with a practiced charm, shaking hands and offering toasts, yet there was a tightness to his jaw that Miss Marple found telling. Her mind flickered back to the monogrammed handkerchief she'd found in his locked study, a small silken clue that hinted at a deeper web of secrets. Tonight, she sensed, was a chance to tug at that web. As the orchestra struck up a waltz, Miss Marple's gaze settled on a new figure entering the ballroom. The woman was striking, though not in the conventional sense. Her gown, a deep emerald green, was elegant but curiously outdated, its high neckline and long sleeves evoking a style from a decade past. Her auburn hair was swept up in a chignon, adorned with a single pearl comb, and her posture was erect, almost defiant. She lingered near the entrance, her eyes scanning the room with an intensity that Miss Marple found immediately intriguing. This was no ordinary guest. Curious, Miss Marple murmured to herself, adjusting her spectacles. She reached for her small glass of sherry, more for appearances than thirst, and watched as the woman introduced earlier as Eleanor, a distant cousin of the Haverford family, began to circulate. Eleanor's movements were deliberate, her smiles fleeting and her attention seemed to fixate on Roland. When their eyes met across the room, Roland's expression flickered, a momentary crack in his polished facade. Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. Very curious indeed. She set down her glass and rose, her movements unhurried but purposeful. The ball was a perfect stage for what she called her polite interrogations, conversations so gentle and disarming that her subjects rarely realized they were being questioned until it was too late. She navigated the crowd with ease, pausing to compliment Lady Beatrice on the floral arrangements and to exchange pleasantries with the local magistrate about the weather. All the while, she kept Eleanor in her peripheral vision, noting how the woman lingered near Roland, her fingers tightening around her fan whenever he spoke to Clara. Miss Marple found her opportunity when Eleanor stepped onto the terrace for a breath of air. The night was cool, the sky a velvet expanse pricked with stars, and the terrace was mercifully quiet, save for the distant strains of the orchestra. Eleanor stood by the balustrade, her silhouette framed against the moonlit gardens. Miss Marple approached, her footsteps soft on the stone. "Good evening, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice warm and inviting. "It's a lovely night, isn't it? I find these balls can be rather overwhelming, don't you?" Eleanor turned, startled, but her expression softened at the sight of Miss Marple's kindly face. "Oh, yes, quite," she replied, her voice carrying a faint tremor. "I'm not much for crowds, I'm afraid." Miss Marple smiled, settling beside her as if they were old friends. "I understand completely. I'm Jane Marple, from St. Mary Mead. I don't believe we've been properly introduced. You're Eleanor, aren't you? A cousin of the Haverfords, I hear." Eleanor nodded, her fingers brushing the pearl comb in her hair. "Yes, a distant cousin. I haven't been to the manor in years. It's changed." "Oh, places do change, don't they?" Miss Marple said, her tone light, but her eyes sharp. "But family ties, they're enduring, aren't they? I suppose you've known Roland and Clara for some time?" Eleanor hesitated, her gaze drifting to the gardens. "Not terribly well," she said carefully. "Roland and I met a few times in London, years ago. Clara was just a girl then." "London. How exciting," Miss Marple said, as if the city were a distant fairyland. "I imagine you and Roland must have had some interesting conversations back then. He seems such a worldly gentleman." Eleanor's smile was tight. "He's charming, certainly. Always has been." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent curiosity. "And yet, you seem a little out of place here. If you don't mind my saying, that lovely dress, it reminds me of one my niece wore years ago. Such a timeless style." Eleanor's hand froze on her fan, and Miss Marple noted the slight flush that crept up her neck. "It was my mother's," she said quickly. "I thought it fitting for such an occasion." "Oh, how sentimental," Miss Marple said, her voice dripping with warmth. "Family heirlooms are so special, aren't they? I have a locket myself, from my grandmother. Do you have anything like that?" Eleanor's fingers twitched, as if resisting the urge to touch something at her throat. "Not tonight," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I left my jewelry at home." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The locket she'd found in Roland's study bore the same monogrammy H as the handkerchief. Eleanor Haverford, or someone using that name, was tied to Roland in a way that went beyond cousinly affection. But pressing too hard now risked scaring her off, and Miss Marple was nothing if not patient. "Well, my dear, I won't keep you from the festivities," Miss Marple said, patting Eleanor's arm. "But do come find me if you need a quiet moment. These young people and their dancing can be exhausting for us older souls." Eleanor managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Miss Marple. You're very kind." As Miss Marple returned to the ballroom, She felt a familiar thrill, the quiet satisfaction of a hunter who knows the prey is near. Eleanor was hiding something, and her connection to Roland was no mere coincidence. The locket, the handkerchief, the outdated dress, it all pointed to a past that Eleanor was trying to conceal, and Roland was part of it. The ball continued, the music swirling as couples spun across the floor. Miss Marple took her seat again, her eyes following Eleanor as she re-entered the room. The woman's composure had returned, but there was a new wariness in her movements, as if she sensed she was being watched. Miss Marple sipped her sherry, her mind piecing together the puzzle. Eleanor's story about being a distant cousin was flimsy at best. The way she watched Roland, the way she avoided direct answers, it all suggested a deeper involvement. Was she a jilted lover, a partner, in some scheme, or, perhaps, a pawn in Roland's game? Her thoughts were interrupted by young Timothy, Clara's brother, who bounded over with the enthusiasm of a puppy. His freckled face was flushed from dancing, and his tie was slightly askew. "Miss Marple," he whispered, leaning close. "You'll never guess what I saw?" Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, her expression indulgent. "Do tell, Timothy. You know, I'm always interested in your observations." The day passed in a blur of wedding preparations, flowers to be arranged, menus to be finalized, and 100 other details that kept the manor humming. Miss Marple played her part, offering gentle suggestions to Lady Beatrice and soothing Clara's nerves, all while keeping an eye on Eleanor. The younger woman was everywhere and nowhere, flitting through the manor like a ghost. Her smiles brittle and her eyes wary. At luncheon, Miss Marple maneuvered to sit beside her, engaging her in light conversation about the weather and the beauty of the manor's gardens. Eleanor responded politely, but her answers were vague, her attention elsewhere. When Roland entered the room, her fork froze midair, and Miss Marple noted the way her gaze followed him, a mix of fear and something deeper regret. "Perhaps such a charming couple, aren't they?" Miss Marple said, nodding toward Roland and Clara, who were speaking with a group of guests. "It's rare to see such devotion these days." Eleanor's lips pressed into a thin line. "Yes," she said, her voice flat. "Very devoted." Miss Marple leaned closer, her tone confiding. "You know, my dear, I've seen many weddings in my time, and they always bring out such emotions. Joy, of course, but sometimes other feelings. Old promises, perhaps, or dreams that didn't quite come true." Eleanor's hand tightened around her glass, and for a moment, Miss Marple thought she might crack. But then she laughed, a brittle sound that didn't reach her eyes. "You're very perceptive, Miss Marple," she said. "But I'm just here to celebrate Clara's happiness." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her smile unwavering. "That's what we're all here for." As the meal ended, Miss Marple excused herself, her mind alight with new questions. Eleanor's reaction to Roland, her guarded responses, the locket. She no longer wore it, all pointed to a wound that had yet to heal. Miss Marple was no stranger to the complexities of the human heart, and she sensed that Eleanor's story was one of betrayal, perhaps even heartbreak. But how did it connect to Roland's plans for Clara? That afternoon, Miss Marple took a walk through the manor's grounds, her parasol shielding her from the sun as she pondered her next move. The gardens were a riot of color, roses and lavender. Mingling with the scent of freshly cut grass, she paused by a fountain, its gentle splash a soothing counterpoint to her racing thoughts. The locket, the handkerchief, the argument in the library, each was a thread in a larger tapestry, and Eleanor was the needle pulling them together. As she turned to head back to the manor, she spotted Timothy racing across the lawn, his face alight with excitement. "Miss Marple," he called, skidding to a stop. "I found something." She smiled, her heart warming at his enthusiasm. What is it, Timothy? He glanced around, then pulled a small envelope from his pocket. I saw Eleanor drop this in the hall. It's got her initials on it, see? He held it up, and sure enough, the envelope was sealed with a wax stamp bearing the monogram each. Miss Marple took it carefully, her fingers tracing the seal. You're a marvel, Timothy, she said, but we mustn't open it just yet. Let's keep it safe, shall we? Timothy nodded, his eyes shining. You're going to catch them, aren't you? Miss Marple? Whatever they're up to, she chuckled, patting his shoulder. I'm going to try, my dear. Now run along and don't tell anyone about this. As Timothy dashed off, Miss Marple slipped the envelope into her reticule, her mind racing. The envelope was another clue, another piece of the puzzle. She would wait until she was alone to examine it, but she had a feeling it would confirm her suspicions about Eleanor's role in Roland's scheme. The rest of the day passed in a flurry of activity, but Miss Marple's thoughts were never far from Eleanor. That evening, as the manor settled into a quiet hum, she retired to her room and opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in a hurried hand. Eleanor, you must hold your nerve. The plan is in motion, and there's no turning back. Meet me at the old oak at midnight. Miss Marple's lips curved into a smile. Well, well, she murmured. The plot thickens. She tucked the note away, her mind already planning her next move. Midnight at the old oak, another chance to observe, to listen, to uncover the truth. Eleanor was no mere cousin, and Roland was no mere groom. They were bound by something dark, something dangerous, and Miss Marple was determined to bring it to light. As she prepared for bed, she felt a quiet satisfaction, the kind that came from knowing she was closing in on her quarry. The locket, the handkerchief, the note, they were all pieces of a larger mystery, and Eleanor was at its heart. Miss Marple closed her eyes, her mind already drifting to the old oak and the secrets it would reveal. The wedding was drawing closer, but so was the moment of truth, and Miss Marple was ready. Chapter 7. The coated ledger. Late afternoon sun cast golden streaks through the tall windows of Haverford Manor's library, where Miss Jane Marple sat at a polished oak table, her small, neat hands folded over a cup of chamomile tea. The room smelled of old leather and wax polish, its shelves heavy with dusty tomes that seemed to whisper secrets of their own. Across from her, young Timothy Haverford fidgeted, his freckled face alight with a mix of excitement and nerves. A boy of 12, with a mop of chestnut hair and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. He was Clara's younger brother and Miss Marple's unexpected ally in her quiet investigation. Miss Marple, Timothy whispered, glancing toward the heavy library door as if expecting Roland Haverford himself to burst through. Are you sure about this? If Roland catches us with his ledger, he'll be furious. Miss Marple's lips curved into a gentle smile, her pale blue eyes twinkling with reassurance. My dear Timothy, a locked door is only as strong as the curiosity it provokes. We have the ledger now, and I've no intention of letting it slip back into Mr. Haverford's hands before we've had a proper look. Besides, you were quite the hero in fetching it. Timothy grinned, his cheeks flushing at the praise. 2 days prior, during a bustling tea party, Miss Marple had orchestrated a minor spill of raspberry cordial, nothing too dramatic, just enough to send the housekeeper scurrying for a cloth. In the chaos, Timothy had slipped into Roland's study, nimble as a cat, and retrieved the small, leather-bound ledger Miss Marple had glimpsed during her own covert visit. Now, it lay between them, its black cover unassuming yet heavy with promise. The ledger was no ordinary record. Miss Marple had noticed its coded entries during her brief exploration of the study. Each line a jumble of letters and numbers that seemed to dance mockingly before her eyes. She had also found a photograph tucked inside a younger Roland, arm around a woman whose face was half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat, her smile sharp as a blade. The monogrammed handkerchief she pocketed bore the initials EH, a clue that nagged at her, like a loose thread in her knitting. But it was the ledger that held the key. She was certain. "Let's see what secrets Mr. Haverford is so keen to hide," Miss Marple said, opening the ledger with care. The pages crackled faintly, revealing rows of cryptic notations: St. 1 to K, L, 3/24, VC, 8KC, 7/25, and stranger still, EH, 5KP, 9/24. The codes were interspersed with dates, sums, and what appeared to be abbreviations for names or places, all written in Roland's precise hand. Timothy leaned closer, his brow furrowed. "It looks like gibberish." "How do you even start with something like this?" Miss Marple chuckled. Softly, "Patience, Timothy. Codes are like people, they seem complex at first, but they follow patterns if you know where to look. When I was a girl, my vicar, Mr. Pennington, had a passion for cryptography. He'd spend hours devising puzzles for the church newsletter, simple ciphers to entertain the parish. I learned a thing or two from him, nothing too scholarly, mind you, but enough to recognize a substitution cipher when I see one." She traced a finger along a line, St. 12K, L, 3/24. "The numbers are likely sums of money," she mused. 1 to K could mean £12,000. The letters might represent initials or locations. And the final partel, 3/24, could be a date or a reference to something else entirely. Let's start with the simplest possibility, a Caesar's cipher, where each letter is shifted by a fixed number. Timothy's eyes widened. Like A becomes B, B becomes C. Exactly, Miss Marple said, her voice warm with encouragement. "You're a quick study. Let's try a shift of 3, a common choice for beginners. S becomes P, T becomes Q." She scribbled on a scrap of paper, her handwriting as neat as her thoughts. After a moment, she paused, frowning. "No, that doesn't yield anything sensible. Let's try a keyword cipher instead. Mr. Haverford strikes me as a man who fancies himself clever. Perhaps he used a word meaningful to him." She glanced around the library, her gaze settling on a silver-framed portrait of Roland, his dark eyes staring out with a hint of arrogance. "What do we know about him, Timothy? He's vain, fond of his own name, perhaps. Let's try Roland as the keyword." Timothy watched, fascinated, as Miss Marple wrote out the alphabet, then aligned it with the word Roland repeated beneath. R becomes A, O becomes B, L becomes C, she murmured, decoding the first entry. After several minutes of careful work, the code ST transformed into PQ, still not a name, but a step closer. She tried another entry, VC, which became SC under the same cipher. "It's still nonsense," Timothy said, slumping back in his chair. "Not nonsense," Miss Marple corrected gently. "Merely a puzzle that hasn't yet revealed its shape. Codes often hide behind layers, like a nested set of drawers. Let's consider the abbreviations as initials. ST might stand for a company or a person. The sums suggest financial transactions, and the dates 3/24, 7/25 could be months and years, perhaps March 1924, July 1925. Timothy's face lit up. "Money? So Roland's hiding something about money?" "Very likely," Miss Marple said, her tone measured. "And large sums, at that. £12,000 is no small matter, even for a man of Roland's supposed wealth. I suspect he's entangled in something unsavory, perhaps a scheme to bolster his fortunes through Clara's inheritance. The library door creaked, and both froze. Footsteps echoed in the hall, slow and deliberate. Miss Marple calmly closed the ledger and slid it beneath a stack of novels, her movements as unhurried as if she were arranging flowers. The door opened, revealing Lady Beatrice, her silver hair swept into an elegant chignon, her expression one of mild concern. "Jane, Timothy, you've been in here ages," she said, her voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "I hope you're not tiring yourself before the wedding preparations tomorrow." "Not at all, Beatrice," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "Timothy was kind enough to show me the library's treasures. We were just discussing the history of Haverford Manor. Quite a legacy your family has." Lady Beatrice's eyes softened. "Indeed. Though I confess, it's a lot to manage these days with Clara's wedding and all. Roland's been a godsend, handling so many details." Miss Marple's ears pricked at the mention of Roland. "He's a man of many talents, it seems. I heard he's involved with the company Silverthorne Limited, was it? Quite an investor." From what the village says, Lady Beatrice's brow furrowed slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Silverthorne, oh, that's one of his ventures, I believe. He mentioned it once, but, well, it didn't sound terribly successful. Bankrupt, last I heard." "Why do you ask?" Miss Marple waved a hand dismissively. "Idle chatter from the village postmistress. You know how gossip travels. I merely thought it curious, a man of his energy tied to a failing company. Yes, well, Roland's full of surprises," Lady Beatrice said, her tone light but uncertain. She glanced at Timothy, who was studiously examining a book on butterflies. "Do join us for tea soon, Jane. Clara's eager to hear your stories about St. Mary Mead." "Of course," Miss Marple said, rising gracefully. "We'll be along shortly." As Lady Beatrice departed, Miss Marple exchanged a look with Timothy. "Silverthorne Limited," she said softly. "Bankrupt, yet Roland's ledger shows thousands moving through it. That, my dear boy, is a thread worth pulling." Timothy's eyes gleamed. "What do we do next?" "We need information," Miss Marple said, her mind already spinning. "Silverthorne may be the key to Roland's intentions. I have a friend in London, Mr. Hayworth, a retired banker with a knack for sniffing out financial irregularities. I'll send him a telegram tonight, asking him to look into Silverthorne's records." Discreetly. Of course, she opened the ledger again, her fingers brushing the coded entries. "But first, let's crack this cipher properly. The keyword Roland was too obvious. Let's try something tied to his ambitions, perhaps Clara, since she seems central to his plans." Using Clara as the keyword, Miss Marple reworked the cipher. This time, ST decoded to NO, and VC became QX, still no clear names. But the sums and dates began to align with a pattern. "These might be aliases," she said, "or code names for transactions. An L could be a person, a place, or even a bank. We need more context." Timothy piped up. "What about the photograph? The woman with Roland, maybe she's part of it." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts drifting to the monogrammed handkerchief. "A woman, perhaps, with a role in this scheme. The photograph and the handkerchief suggest a connection. But we mustn't jump to conclusions. Let's focus on the ledger for now." The afternoon slipped into evening as they tested ciphers, Miss Marple guiding Timothy through the logic of substitution and transposition. They tried keywords like Haverford, Silverthorne, even wedding, but the codes resisted, their secrets locked tight. Yet Miss Marple's patience was a quiet force, her mind sifting through possibilities like a gardener tending delicate blooms. At last, a breakthrough. using the keyword fortune, a guess inspired by Roland's apparent obsession with wealth. The code ST resolved to RS, and VC became TA. The dates aligned with bank transactions Miss Marple had overheard Roland discussing in the garden, and the sums matched deposits rumored in the village. RS could be Roland himself, she reasoned, and TA might be an accomplice. We're getting somewhere, she said, her voice steady but triumphant. This ledger tracks money moving through Silverthorn, likely to conceal its true source or destination. Roland's playing a dangerous game, and Clara's inheritance is the prize. Timothy's jaw dropped. You mean he's marrying her for her money? It's an old story, Timothy, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but firm. But not the whole story. There's more here, partners, perhaps, or debts. We need Mr. Hayworth's findings to confirm it. As twilight deepened, Miss Marple drafted a telegram to her London contact, her words precise. Investigate Silverthorn. Ltd. Recent activities, ownership, financial status, urgent, discreet. Jane Marple. She handed it to Timothy. Take this to the village post office before it closes. Tell no one, not even your sister. Trust is a delicate thing in matters like these. Timothy nodded, slipping the telegram into his pocket. I won't let you down, Miss Marple. I know you won't, she said, her smile warm. As he dashed off, she returned the ledger to its hiding place, her mind buzzing with the day's discoveries. The library felt quieter now, the shadows longer, but Miss Marple's resolve was unshaken. She thought of Clara, radiant yet vulnerable, and of Roland's polished charm, a mask for greed. The handkerchief, the photograph, the stranger in the garden, all pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. She stepped into the hall, where the manor's grandeur felt hollow, its chandeliers casting flickering light on portraits of Haverfords. Past, a maid hurried by, her eyes averted, and Miss Marple noted the tension in her posture. The household was a web of secrets, and Roland was at its center dot at dinner that evening. Miss Marple observed Roland closely. He was all charm, regaling the table with tales of his travels, his dark hair gleaming under the candlelight. Clara hung on his every word, her laughter bright but brittle. Miss Marple sipped her soup, her expression serene, but her mind catalogued every gesture, every glance Roland exchanged with the other guests. One man, a gaunt fellow with a sharp nose, seemed to watch Roland too closely, his fingers tapping nervously on his glass. Another clue, perhaps. After dinner, Miss Marple retired to her room, where she opened her notebook and added a sketch of the gaunt man's face. Beside her drawing of the garden stranger, she wrote, Silverthorn. Money, accomplice. The ledger's codes danced in her mind, their meaning tantalizingly close. She felt a quiet thrill, the kind that came from unraveling and not others couldn't see. As she prepared for bed, the manor settled into an uneasy silence. Outside, the wind rustled the trees, carrying whispers of secrets yet to be uncovered. Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting needles clicking softly, her thoughts sharp as the needle's points. Roland's scheme was clear now, but its full scope eluded her. The telegram to Mr. Hayworth was a step toward truth, but time was short. The wedding was days away. She closed her notebook, her heart steady. One step at a time, Jane, she murmured to herself. The truth always finds its way, like water through a crack. The chapter closed with Miss Marple turning down her lamp, the room plunging into darkness. She was content with her progress. The ledger's secrets partially unlocked, but wary of Roland's growing influence over Clara. The game was afoot, and Miss Marple was ready for the next move. Chapter 8. The stolen veiled eve of Clara's wedding. To Roland, Haverford dawned with a deceptive calm, the kind that blankets a manor before a storm. Haverford Manor, its stone facade glowing under the late summer sun, bustled with preparations. Servants darted between rooms, their arms laden with linens, silverware, and garlands of roses. While the air hummed with the scent of polished wood and fresh flowers, Miss Jane Marple, however, felt no such tranquility. Her sharp eyes, hidden behind the gentle facade of an elderly spinster, scanned the scene with a quiet intensity. The disappearance of Clara's priceless heirloom veil, reported just after breakfast, had set the household on edge, and Miss Marple's instincts told her this was no mere mishap. The veil, a delicate cascade of lace passed down through generations of Clara's family, was more than a bridal accessory. It was a symbol of lineage, woven with threads of history and sentiment. Its theft, discovered when Clara's maid, Lily, found the locked cedar box in Clara's dressing room empty, had sent Clara into a tearful panic. Lady Beatrice, Clara's aunt, had summoned Miss Marple to the morning room, her face pale but composed. "Jane, this is a disaster," Lady Beatrice said, her voice low as she poured tea with a trembling hand. Clara's beside herself. That veil was her grandmother's, worn by every bride in the family for a century. To lose it now, the day before the wedding, it's unthinkable. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene, but her mind racing. "A curious misfortune, Beatrice," she murmured. "A locked box, you say? And no sign of tampering?" "None," Lady Beatrice replied, wringing her hands. "The key was with Clara, and she swears she left it in her jewelry case. Only Lily and I knew where it was kept." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest. "And yet, someone knew precisely where to look. Tell me, has anyone unfamiliar been in Clara's room recently?" Lady Beatrice frowned. "Only the usual. Staff and Eleanor. Of course she's been helping Clara with fittings. But surely you don't suspect—" "Not suspect, Beatrice," Miss Marple interrupted gently. "I merely observe. May I see the dressing room?" The dressing room, tucked off Clara's spacious bedroom, was a haven of feminine elegance. Pale blue wallpaper, a mahogany vanity strewn with silver brushes, and a tall window overlooking the manor's rose garden. The cedar box, intricately carved, sat open on a side table, its emptiness a stark accusation. Miss Marple examined it closely, her gloved fingers tracing the unblemished lock. No scratches, no signs of force. She knelt, her knees creaking faintly, and peered at the floor. A faint whiff of something sweet caught her attention. Perfume, floral but with an undercurrent of musk, lingering near the box. "Clara, my dear," Miss Marple said, turning to the young woman who hovered in the doorway, her eyes red-rimmed. "This perfume, do you recognize it?" Clara sniffed delicately, then shook her head. "It's not mine. I wear lavender." "Perhaps it's Lily's." Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "Perhaps. But let us not leap to conclusions." She rose, brushing her skirt. "Now, tell me about your visitors yesterday. Every detail, no matter how small." Clara recounted the previous day's flurry, Roland stopping by to discuss the rehearsal dinner, Lady Beatrice checking the veil's fit, and Eleanor, the distant cousin who'd arrived for the wedding, offering to adjust a loose stitch on Clara's gown. Miss Marple listened, her mind snagging on Eleanor's name, the woman from the pre-wedding ball, with her outdated dress and evasive answers, had already piqued Miss Marple's curiosity. The monogrammed locket Eleanor had left behind, matching the handkerchief from Roland's study, was tucked safely in Miss Marple's reticule. And now, this perfume, a clue too distinct to ignore. "Clara, would you mind if I spoke with Eleanor?" Miss Marple asked, her tone mild. Clara hesitated, then nodded. "She's in the guest wing, I think. She's been so kind, Jane. I can't imagine she'd—" "Of course not," Miss Marple said soothingly. "Just a chat." The guest wing was quieter, its corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced Haverfords. Miss Marple found Eleanor in a small sitting room, embroidering a cushion with quick, precise stitches. Eleanor was in her late 30s, her dark hair swept into a severe bun, her dress a muted green that did little to flatter her sharp features. She looked up as Miss Marple entered, her smile polite but guarded. "Miss Marple." "What a surprise," Eleanor said, setting aside her needlework. "Is something wrong?" Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her side. "Oh, nothing too serious, my dear. Just this unfortunate business with Clara's veil. You were in her room yesterday. I understand." Eleanor's fingers twitched, but her voice remained steady. "Yes, I helped with her gown. The hem needed adjusting." "And you saw the veil?" Miss Marple's tone was conversational, her eyes fixed on Eleanor's face. "I saw the box," Eleanor said carefully. "Clara showed it to me. Such a lovely piece. But I didn't touch it." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly, as she pulled yarn from her bag. "Of course. It's just curious, isn't it? A locked box, a missing key, and now a vanished heirloom. One might almost think someone wanted to upset Clara." Eleanor's smile faltered. "Who would do such a thing? It's her wedding day." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her gaze sharpening. "But weddings can stir up all sorts of motives, can't they? Envy, perhaps, or something more calculated." She paused, letting the silence stretch. "I couldn't help but notice your perfume, Eleanor. It's quite distinctive. Floral, with a hint of musk." Eleanor's hand froze mid-stitch. I don't wear perfume," she said, too quickly. "It must be the soap here." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle skepticism. "Soap, you say? How curious. I could have sworn I smelled it near the cedar box this morning." The room seemed to shrink, the air thick with unspoken tension. Eleanor's eyes darted to the door, then back to Miss Marple. "I don't know what you're implying." "Miss Marple, I had nothing to do with the veil." Miss Marple's needles paused. "My dear, I imply nothing. I only ask questions. But if you know anything at all, it might save Clara a great deal of heartache." Eleanor's composure cracked, her lips trembling. I can't. It's not my place." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "Eleanor, if someone is trying to harm Clara, keeping silent won't protect her. Or you." For a moment, Eleanor seemed to waver, her fingers clutching the embroidery hoop. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, she stood. "I'm sorry, Miss Marple. I have a headache. I need to rest." As Eleanor hurried out, Miss Marple watched her go, her mind cataloging every gesture, every word. The woman was hiding something, and the perfume was no coincidence. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to Roland, the ledger, and the mysterious stranger, Victor Crane. The veils that felt like a deliberate act, not to steal, but to disrupt. But why? To delay the wedding, to pressure Clara. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture remained incomplete. Determined to find the veil, Miss Marple returned to Clara's dressing room. The household was in chaos, with servants searching attics and guest rooms under Lady Beatrice's anxious direction. Miss Marple, however, preferred a quieter approach. She examined the dressing room again, this time focusing on the vanity. A small drawer, slightly ajar, caught her eye. Inside, buried under a pile of ribbons, was a folded note. It read, "Keep her distracted. The plan depends on it." The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the ink matched the cryptic note from the wedding invitation. Tucking the note into her reticule, Miss Marple moved to the guest wing, her steps purposeful but unhurried. Eleanor's room was at the end of the corridor, its door slightly open. Slipping inside, Miss Marple scanned the space, a neatly made bed, a traveling case, and a small dressing table. The same musky floral scent lingered, stronger here. On the table, half hidden under a shawl, was a folded bundle of lace. Miss Marple unfolded it carefully. It was Clara's veil, its delicate patterns unmistakable. She didn't touch it further, knowing fingerprints could complicate matters. Instead, she left the room and summoned Lady Beatrice, who gasped at the sight. "Jane, you found it." "But how?" "It was misplaced." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral. "Best not to make a fuss. Let's return it to Clara's." Relief was palpable as she clutched the veil, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, Jane, thank you. I thought it was gone forever." Miss Marple patted her hand. "All's well now, my dear. But do keep it close tonight." As Clara and Lady Beatrice fussed over the veil, Miss Marple retreated to her room, her mind alight with questions. The theft was no accident. It was a tactic, meant to unsettle Clara or delay the wedding. Eleanor's involvement was clear, but her flustered denial suggested she wasn't the mastermind. Roland, with his locked study and coded ledger, loomed large in Miss Marple's thoughts. The note about distraction pointed to a larger scheme, one tied to the wedding's timing. That evening, at a subdued dinner, Miss Marple observed Eleanor closely. The woman avoided her gaze, picking at her food while Roland, seated at the head of the table, exuded charm. Yet his eyes flicked to Eleanor more than once. A silent communication Miss Marple didn't miss. Clara, still shaken but radiant in her gratitude, spoke little, her hand resting on the velvet box containing the veil. After dinner, Miss Marple took a turn in the garden, the cool night air sharpening her thoughts. The pieces were aligning. Roland's financial dealings with Silverthorne Limited, Victor Crane's late-night meetings, Eleanor's complicity, and now the veil's theft. It was a plot to manipulate Clara, likely for her inheritance. But the exact mechanics remained elusive. Miss Marple needed more proof, not just suspicion. She paused by the rose garden, where she'd overheard Roland and Victor days before. A rustle in the bushes made her turn, her hand tightening on her reticule. A figure emerged. Timothy, Clara's young brother, his eyes wide with excitement. "Miss Marple," he whispered. "I saw Eleanor sneaking out here earlier. She was hiding something under her cloak." Miss Marple's heart quickened. "Did you see what it was, Timothy?" He shook his head. "It was too dark." But she went toward the old summer house. The summer house, a neglected structure at the garden's edge, was an ideal hiding place. Miss Marple followed Timothy, her steps cautious. The wooden door creaked as they entered, the air musty and damp. In the corner, beneath a pile of gardening tools, was a small leather case. Inside were papers, letters, to be precise, addressed to Roland from an unnamed sender. The handwriting matched the distraction note, and the content hinted at payments and deadlines, all tied to the wedding date. Miss Marple tucked the case under her arm. "Well done, Timothy," she said, her voice warm. "You've been most helpful." Back in her room, she pored over the letters by lamplight. They confirmed her suspicions. Roland and Eleanor were working together, with Victor as their intermediary. The veil's theft was a ploy to create chaos, perhaps to pressure Clara into signing something under duress. The wedding was the deadline, the moment Roland would secure his prize. Miss Marple leaned back, her knitting forgotten. She was certain now Eleanor was a pawn, coerced or complicit. But Roland was the architect. The letters were damning, but not enough to confront him yet. She needed to catch him in the act, to expose his scheme before the vows were spoken. As the manor slept, Miss Marple sat by her window, the moonlight casting shadows on her notebook. She sketched out her plan. Tomorrow, she would confront Eleanor again, offering leniency for the truth. The girl was frightened, her loyalty to Roland shaky. With Victor's identity confirmed by her London contact, the net was closing. Miss Marple felt a quiet satisfaction, the thrill of the chase tempered by her resolve to protect Clara. The wedding loomed, a ticking clock. But Miss Marple, with her unassuming air and razor-sharp mind, was ready. The veil was back. The household calmed, but the real battle was yet to come. She closed her notebook, her lips curving in a faint smile. Roland Haverford might think himself clever, but he had underestimated the elderly spinster from St. Mary Mead. Chapter 9. The London connection. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Haverford Manor, casting long shadows across the breakfast room where Miss Jane Marple sat, her teacup poised delicately in her hand. The clink of porcelain and the low murmur of the Manor's guests filled the air, but Miss Marple's attention was elsewhere, her sharp eyes scanning a telegram that had arrived just before dawn. The paper, creased from her careful folding, bore the spidery handwriting of her old friend, Mr. Reginald Hawthorne, a retired solicitor with a knack for unearthing financial secrets in London's labyrinthine business world. His message was brief but electrifying. Silverthorne Limited. A shell. Funds funneled through obscure accounts. Roland Haverford tied to Victor Crane, known swindler. Details to follow. Be cautious. Miss Marple folded the telegram and tucked it into her reticule, her expression serene, but her mind racing. The pieces of the puzzle she had been assembling since her arrival at the manor were falling into place, each one revealing a darker facet of Roland Haverford's intentions. Clara, the radiant but fragile bride-to-be, was poised to marry a man whose charm masked a web of deceit. The stakes were higher now, and Miss Marple knew she had to act swiftly to protect Clara from a ruinous future. But first, she needed to confirm the extent of Roland's scheme and ensure her evidence was airtight. The breakfast room buzzed with the usual chatter of wedding guests. Lady Beatrice, Clara's formidable aunt, held court at the head of the table, regaling a cluster of cousins with tales of her youth, while Clara herself sat quietly, her smile strained as she pushed a piece of toast around her plate. Roland, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, was absent, having excused himself to attend to urgent business in the village. Miss Marple noted his absence with a flicker of satisfaction. It gave her time to pursue her next move. Clara, my dear, Miss Marple said, leaning toward the young woman with a gentle smile. You look a touch pale this morning. Perhaps a walk in the gardens would do you good. The roses are quite splendid this time of year. Clara's eyes, shadowed with unspoken worry, brightened slightly. Oh, Miss Marple, that sounds lovely. I could use a bit of fresh air. As they strolled through the manor's manicured gardens, the scent of blooming roses mingling with the crisp morning air, Miss Marple steered the conversation toward neutral topics: the weather, the beauty of the estate, the intricacies of Clara's wedding gown. But her keen observation never wavered. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she plucked a petal from a rose, and her gaze darted toward the manor's upper windows, as if expecting to see someone watching. Clara, Miss Marple said softly, pausing by a stone bench beneath a trellis. I couldn't help but notice you seem a bit preoccupied. Weddings are such joyful occasions, but they can also bring nerves. Is there anything troubling you, my dear? Clara hesitated, her fingers twisting the petal into a tight spiral. It's nothing, really, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Just silly worries. Roland has been so kind, but he's been so busy lately, and I suppose I feel a bit overwhelmed. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of grandmotherly concern, though her mind catalogued every word. It's quite natural to feel a bit adrift before such a big day, she said. But you know, my dear, Sometimes sharing a worry can make it feel lighter. I have known many a bride in St. Mary Mead who found comfort in a quiet chat. Clara's lips parted as if she might speak, but then she shook her head and forced a smile. "You're very kind, Miss Marple. I'll be all right, truly. It's just the excitement." Miss Marple patted her hand, letting the moment pass. She knew better than to press too hard. Clara's trust was fragile, and forcing a confession now might close the door to further confidences. Instead, she resolved to follow the thread Mr. Hawthorne had provided. Silverthorne Ltd. was the key, and Victor Crane, the mysterious stranger she had seen exchanging packages with Roland, was the lock. By mid-morning, Miss Marple had excused herself from the manor's activities, claiming a need to rest her old bones before the evening's festivities. In truth, she had slipped into the manor's library, a cavernous room lined with leather-bound volumes and heavy oak furniture. The library was quiet, save for the faint ticking of a grandfather clock, and Miss Marple settled at a writing desk with a small notebook and pencil. She began to jot down her thoughts, her neat handwriting forming a map of connections. Roland, Silverthorne Ltd., Victor Crane, coded ledger, monogrammed handkerchief, Eleanor's locket. Her London contact's telegram had confirmed her suspicions about Silverthorne Ltd., but she needed more than hearsay to expose Roland. The ledger she had found in his study, with its cryptic entries, suggested a financial scheme of considerable scale. But decoding it fully had been a challenge even with Timothy's help. Now, with Crane's name in play, she suspected the ledger was a record of laundered money, funneled through a fictitious company to conceal Roland's true intentions marrying Clara for her substantial inheritance. Miss Marple's thoughts were interrupted by the creak of the library door. She glanced up to see Timothy, Clara's younger brother, peeking inside, his freckled face alight with mischief. "Miss Marple," he whispered, slipping into the room and closing the door behind him. "I knew you'd be up to something. Everyone else is fussing over table settings, but you're in here sleuthing, aren't you?" Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes twinkling. "Now, Timothy, I'm merely catching up on some reading. But since you're here, perhaps you could help an old lady with a small task." Timothy's grin widened. He was a sharp boy, quick to notice details others overlooked, and Miss Marple had come to rely on his enthusiasm. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, bouncing on the balls of his feet. "I need you to keep an eye on Mr. Haverford when he returns," Miss Marple said, her tone conspiratorial. "Nothing too obvious, mind you. Just note where he goes, who he speaks to, and if he carries anything unusual." "Can you do that without being seen?" Timothy nodded vigorously, like a spy. "I'm on it, Miss Marple." As he darted out of the library, Miss Marple returned to her notebook. She needed to verify Crane's identity and his connection to Roland, but the manor was too small a stage for such inquiries. She would have to rely on her London contact again, but this time, she needed specific dates, transactions, and, if possible, a photograph of Victor Crane to confirm he was the stranger she had seen in the garden. She penned a quick note to Mr. Hawthorne, her words precise, urgent. "Need details on Victor Crane appearance, known associates, recent activities. Confirm Silverthorne Ltd. transactions, discretion paramount." She sealed the note and tucked it into her reticule, planning to slip it to the village postmaster during her afternoon walk. But as she rose from the desk, a faint noise caught her attention, a soft scrape, like a chair being moved in the adjacent room. Miss Marple froze, her senses sharpened by years of quiet observation. The library was supposedly empty, and the staff were busy with wedding preparations. Moving silently, she approached the door connecting the library to the drawing room and pressed her ear against the wood. The scrape came again, followed by a muffled voice of man's, low and urgent. "It's too risky now," the voice said. "She's asking questions. We need to move faster." Miss Marple's heart quickened. She recognized the voice Roland Haverford. But who was he speaking to? She eased the door open a fraction, peering through the narrow gap. Roland stood near the fireplace, his back to her, facing a man whose face was obscured by the angle of the room. The man's coat, however, was unmistakable, the same dark tweed she had seen on the stranger in the garden. Victor Crane. "I don't care about her suspicions," Roland snapped, his voice tight with frustration. "We're too close to back out now. The papers are ready, and Clara will sign them tomorrow. Once the wedding's done, we're in the clear." Crane's response was too low to catch, but Miss Marple saw him hand Roland a small envelope. Roland tucked it into his jacket pocket, his movements quick and practiced. "Just make sure the funds are ready," Roland said. "No mistakes this time." Miss Marple eased the door shut, her mind racing. The envelope could be anything forged. Documents, a payment, or even proof of their scheme. She needed to get her hands on it, but confronting Roland directly was out of the question. Instead, she decided to enlist Lady Beatrice's help. The older woman, though fond of Roland, was fiercely protective of Clara and would listen if Miss Marple presented her evidence carefully. The afternoon found Miss Marple in the village, ostensibly to admire the local church's stained glass windows, but in reality to post her letter to Mr. Hawthorne. The village was alive with the hum of wedding anticipation, shopkeepers ranging flowers, children darting through the streets with ribbons, and the postmaster grumbling about the influx of telegrams. Miss Marple handed him her note with a smile, slipping him an extra shilling for discretion. "It's just a little family matter," she said, her tone light. "No need for fuss. Back at the manor." She sought out Lady Beatrice, finding her in the conservatory, surrounded by pots of blooming orchids. The older woman's face lit up at the sight of Miss Marple. "Jane, you old rogue. You've been scarce today. Come, sit with me. These orchids are my pride and joy, you know." Miss Marple settled onto a wicker chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "They're exquisite, Beatrice, but I must confess, I've come on a rather serious matter, lady." Beatrice's smile faded, her sharp eyes narrowing. "Serious? Oh, Jane. Don't tell me you sniffed out some scandal. You always did have a nose for trouble." Miss Marple hesitated, choosing her words with care. "It's about Roland," she began. "I've come across some troubling information. I believe he may not be entirely honest about his intentions with Clara." Lady Beatrice's expression hardened, but she gestured for Miss Marple to continue. Over the next half hour, Miss Marple laid out her findings: the coded ledger, the mysterious stranger, the whispers of Silverthorn Limited, and now the telegram from Mr. Hawthorne confirming Roland's ties to Victor Crane. She omitted the details of her eavesdropping, knowing Beatrice would demand hard proof. But she emphasized the financial discrepancies and the urgency of protecting Clara's inheritance. "Good heavens, Jane," Lady Beatrice said at last, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "If this is true, Clara's future is at stake. But Roland has been so charming, so devoted." "Are you certain?" "I'm not one for rash judgments," Miss Marple replied gently. "But the evidence is mounting, and I fear Clara may be signing away more than her heart if this marriage proceeds. I've asked a friend in London for further details, but in the meantime, we must keep a close eye on Roland. He's planning something for tomorrow, before the rehearsal dinner." Lady Beatrice nodded, her jaw set. "I trust you, Jane. You've never been wrong about these things. What do you propose?" "For now, we watch," Miss Marple said. and we ensure Clara is not alone with him. If I can get a look at the papers he's carrying, we may have the proof we need to stop him." As they spoke, Timothy burst into the conservatory, his face flushed with excitement. "Miss Marple, I followed Roland like you said. He went to the old stables with that man, the one with the funny hat. They were talking about a bank in London and some papers Clara has to sign. I couldn't hear everything, but Roland looked awfully cross." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Well done, Timothy. You've been a great help. Now, run along and keep this to yourself, won't you? We don't want to tip our hand just yet." As Timothy scampered off, Lady Beatrice turned to Miss Marple, her resolve firm. "I'll speak to Clara tonight, gently. Of course, she's headstrong, but she's not foolish. If we can plant a seed of doubt, she may start to see Roland for what he is." Miss Marple nodded, her mind already turning to the next step. The envelope Roland had received from Crane was her target now. If it contained what she suspected forged documents, or proof of their money laundering scheme, it could unravel Roland's plans entirely. But getting to it would require cunning, and Miss Marple knew she would have to tread carefully. That evening, the manor was abuzz with preparations for the rehearsal dinner, the grand event that would mark the final night before the wedding. Guests milled about in their finery, the air filled with laughter and the clink of glasses. Miss Marple, dressed in her usual understated elegance, moved through the crowd with purpose, her eyes scanning for Roland. He was near the grand staircase, charming a group of elderly aunts with his usual ease. But Miss Marple noted the tightness around his eyes, the way his hands strayed to his jacket pocket where the envelope lay. She needed a distraction, something to draw Roland away from the crowd. Spotting Timothy across the room, she caught his eye and gave a subtle nod. The boy, quick as ever, understood immediately. Within minutes, he had accidentally knocked over a tray of champagne flutes, sending glass and liquid crashing to the floor. The room erupted in gasps and laughter, and Roland, ever the gallant host, hurried to assist the flustered staff. Seizing her moment, Miss Marple slipped upstairs to Roland's study. The door was locked, as expected, but she had anticipated this earlier that day. She had persuaded Timothy to borrow the spare key from the housekeeper's ring, promising to return it before anyone noticed. With a steady hand, she unlocked the door and stepped inside, closing it softly behind her. The study was as she remembered it: dark wood, heavy curtains, and the faint scent of cigar smoke. She moved quickly to the desk, her fingers searching for the envelope. It wasn't there. Frowning, she checked the drawers, the bookshelves, even the hidden compartment where she had found the ledger. Nothing. Then, her eyes fell on Roland's overcoat, draped over a chair. She reached into the pocket and felt the crinkle of paper. The envelope was plain, unmarked, but heavy with promise. Miss Marple opened it carefully, revealing a sheaf of documents, bank transfer orders, a draft of a prenuptial agreement, and a letter addressed to a Swiss bank, requesting the transfer of a substantial sum to an account under a false name. The signature was Roland's, but the account details matched those in the ledger's coded entries. Miss Marple's heart raced, but she kept her composure. She tucked the documents back into the envelope and slipped it into her reticule, replacing it with a blank envelope she had brought for just such a purpose. It was a risky move, but if Roland checked his pocket later, he would find nothing amiss, at least for now. As she locked the study door behind her, she heard footsteps approaching. Her breath caught, but she smoothed her expression and turned to find Eleanor, the mysterious cousin, standing at the end of the hall. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with something like fear. "Miss Marple," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "What are you doing up here?" "Oh, my dear," Miss Marple replied, her tone airy. I seem to have taken a wrong turn. These old houses are such a maze, aren't they? I was just looking for the powder room. Eleanor's gaze darted to the study door, but she said nothing, merely nodding and hurrying past. Miss Marple watched her go, her suspicions about Eleanor deepening. The locket, the handkerchief, and now her presence near the study Eleanor was more involved than she had let on. Back at the rehearsal dinner, Miss Marple rejoined the guests, her reticule heavier with the weight of her discovery. She caught Lady Beatrice's eye across the room, giving a slight nod to indicate success. But as she sipped her wine, she noticed Roland watching her, his smile tight and his eyes cold. Had he seen her upstairs? Did he suspect her interference? The evening wore on, and Miss Marple played her part perfectly, laughing at anecdotes and complimenting the chef. But her mind was elsewhere, piecing together the final steps of her plan. The documents in her reticule were damning, but she needed to present them in a way that would convince Clara and expose Roland without endangering anyone. The rehearsal dinner tomorrow would be her chance, but she would need to orchestrate it carefully. As the guests began to disperse, Miss Marple lingered, watching Roland bid goodnight to Clara with a kiss on her hand. Clara's smile was brittle, her eyes searching his face for something she couldn't name. Miss Marple felt a pang of sympathy for the young woman, but also a surge of determination. Roland's scheme was unraveling, and she was one step closer to stopping him. In her room that night, Miss Marple sat by the window, the moonlight casting a soft glow over her notebook. She sketched out her plan for the next day, her pencil moving swiftly. The documents would be her trump card, but she needed to ensure Victor Crane was detained before he could slip away. And Eleanor she would have to be confronted, gently, but firmly, to uncover her role in the plot. As she closed her notebook, Miss Marple allowed herself a small smile. The net was tightening around Roland Haverford, and though the wedding loomed just days away, she was confident she could stop him. She had faced cleverer villains in her time, and none had outwitted her yet. With the evidence in her possession and Lady Beatrice's support, she was ready for the next act in this intricate drama. The chapter ended with Miss Marple extinguishing her lamp and settling into bed, her mind still buzzing with possibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but she was ready. In the quiet of the manor, with the distant hum of crickets outside, she felt a quiet satisfaction. The truth was within her grasp, and she would not let it slip away. Chapter 10. The rehearsal dinner. The grand dining hall of Haverford Manor glowed under the soft flicker of chandeliers, their crystal prisms scattering light across the polished mahogany table. The air was thick with the scent of roasted pheasant, fresh roses, and the nervous anticipation that precedes a wedding. Miss Jane Marple sat near the head of the table, her modest lavender dress blending seamlessly with the elegant decor. Yet her sharp eyes missed nothing. The rehearsal dinner was in full swing, a carefully orchestrated affair meant to cement the union of Clara Haverford and Roland Haverford, the charming but increasingly suspect groom-to-be. To Miss Marple, however, this evening was no mere celebration. It was a chessboard, and she was ready to move her pieces. The table was a study in contrasts. Clara, radiant in a cream silk gown, smiled tightly, her fingers twisting a napkin as she glanced at Roland. He, in turn, exuded effortless charm, his tailored suit impeccable, his laughter just loud enough to draw admiring glances from the guests. Lady Beatrice, Clara's aunt and the matriarch of the manor, presided with regal poise, though her eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. Timothy, Clara's younger brother, fidgeted beside Miss Marple, his boyish curiosity barely contained. And then there was Eleanor, the mysterious cousin in her outdated velvet gown, her gaze darting toward Roland with an intensity that Miss Marple found impossible to ignore. The clink of crystal and the murmur of polite conversation filled the room, but Miss Marple's mind was elsewhere. Her investigation had reached a critical juncture. The ledger from Roland's locked study, decoded with Timothy's help, had revealed ties to the dubious Silverthorn Limited, a company her London contact had confirmed was a front for money laundering. The mysterious Victor Crane, Roland's shadowy associate, was a known swindler, and Eleanor's locket, with its monogram matching the handkerchief from Roland's study, hinted at a deeper connection. Tonight, Miss Marple intended to test Roland's composure, to nudge him toward a mistake that would unravel his carefully woven facade. She sipped her wine, her expression serene, and leaned toward Timothy. "My dear boy," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the chatter. "Do keep an eye on our friend Roland tonight. He's rather like a cat in a room full of pigeons to calm for his own good." Timothy's eyes sparkled with mischief. "You think he's up to something, don't you, Miss Marple? I saw him whispering with that Victor fellow in the hall earlier. Looked awfully sneaky. Did you?" Now, Miss Marple's lips curved slightly. "And what did you overhear?" Timothy leaned closer, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "Something about leaving tonight and making sure it's done. I couldn't hear more. Mrs. Grayson called me to help with the chairs." Miss Marple's mind whirred. Victor planning to leave tonight. That was a development she hadn't anticipated. She patted Timothy's hand. "Well done, Timothy. Keep your ears open, but don't let Roland see you watching. He's cleverer than he looks." As the first course was served, a delicate asparagus soup, Miss Marple turned her attention to Clara, who sat across from her. The young woman's smile was strained, her eyes darting to Roland as he charmed a group of elderly guests with a story about his travels. Miss Marple decided it was time to plant a seed. "Clara, my dear," she said, her tone warm but deliberate, "you must be thrilled about the wedding. Though I do wonder about all these modern prenuptial agreements one hears about. Have you and Roland discussed such things? They're quite the fashion in London, I'm told." Clara's spoon paused mid-air, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "Oh, well, yes, Roland did mention something like that. He said it's just a formality, to protect us both. I signed it yesterday." Her voice wavered, as if she were trying to convince herself. Miss Marple's heart sank, though her face remained placid. A prenuptial agreement? That was no mere formality. Not with a man like Roland. It was likely a legal maneuver to secure Clara's substantial inheritance, which Lady Beatrice had hinted was tied to the Haverford estate. She made a mental note to examine the document if possible. "How sensible," Miss Marple said lightly, "though one does hear of such agreements being complicated. I recall a case in St. Mary Mead where a young man used a similar document. Too well, no matter. I'm sure Roland has only your best interests at heart." Clara's smile faltered, and she glanced at Roland, who was now laughing heartily at a joke from a portly gentleman. Miss Marple noted the exchange with satisfaction. The seed was planted. Now to stir Roland himself. As the main course arrived, pheasant with a rich cranberry glaze. Miss Marple seized an opportunity during a lull in the conversation. She raised her voice just enough to carry across the table, addressing Lady Beatrice, but ensuring Roland could hear. "Lady Beatrice," she began, her tone innocent, "I was reading about some fascinating companies in the financial papers. One called Silverthorn Ltd. Caught my eye, such an intriguing name, though I hear it's had some difficulties. Have you ever come across it?" The effect was immediate. Roland's fork froze halfway to his mouth, his eyes narrowing for a fraction of a second before he recovered with a smooth smile. Lady Beatrice, oblivious to the undercurrent, shook her head. "Silverthorn? I don't believe so, Miss Marple, though I'm not one for business matters. Roland, You're the man of finance here, have you heard of it? Roland's laugh was a touch too loud. Silverthorn Limited. Oh, some minor venture. I believe. Nothing worth noting. Bankrupt last. I heard. He took a long sip of wine, his fingers tightening around the glass. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. Bankrupt. How curious. I could have sworn I read they were still operating, in a manner of speaking. Something about unconventional investments. Roland's smile tightened, and he changed the subject with a story about a recent trip to Paris. But Miss Marple noted the way his gaze flicked toward the door, as if calculating an escape. She also caught Eleanor's reaction, a subtle stiffening, her fingers clutching her napkin. The room was a pressure cooker, and Miss Marple was turning up the heat. As dessert was served, a decadent chocolate tour, Miss Marple excused herself, citing a need for fresh air. In truth, she wanted to observe Roland's next move. She slipped into the shadowed corridor leading to the terrace, her steps silent on the thick carpet. The manor was a labyrinth of oak-paneled halls and hidden alcoves, perfect for eavesdropping. She paused near a partially open door to the library, where she heard low voices. Can't afford to wait, Roland was saying, his tone sharp. If she's asking about Silverthorn, we're running out of time. You're paranoid, came Victor's gravelly reply. She's just an old lady who reads too many newspapers. Stick to the plan, get the signature, get the money, and we're gone. Miss Marple's pulse quickened. So the prenuptial agreement was the key. She pressed closer to the door, careful not to creak the floorboards. And what about Eleanor? Roland hissed. She's getting sloppy. That locket was a mistake. Victor snorted. She's your problem, not mine. I'm leaving tonight, Roland. The train to London departs at midnight. You'd better have my cut ready. Miss Marple's mind raced. Victor's departure was a complication, but it also presented an opportunity. If she could delay him, or better yet, expose his role in the scheme, Roland's plan might collapse under its own weight. She retreated silently, her plan forming. Back at the dinner, the guests were dispersing to the drawing room for coffee and brandy. Miss Marple rejoined Timothy, who was sneaking an extra slice of torte. Timothy, she whispered, I need you to do something very important. Find out where Victor is staying in the village and whether he's packed his bags. But be discreet, my dear. Think of it as a game of hide-and-seek. Timothy grinned, thrilled to be part of the adventure. I'm on it, Miss Marple. As the evening wound down, Miss Marple approached Clara, who was standing alone by the fireplace, her expression troubled. Clara, my dear, Miss Marple said gently, you seem preoccupied. Is there anything you'd like to share? Sometimes an old woman's ear can be a great comfort. Clara hesitated, then spoke in a rush. It's Roland. He's been so insistent about the prenuptial agreement. He says it's to protect my inheritance, but it feels like he's hiding something. And tonight, when you mentioned that company Silverthorn, he looked so strange. I don't know what to think. Miss Marple patted her hand. Trust your instincts, Clara. They're often wiser than we give them credit for. If you'd like, I could glance at that agreement. Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes sees what others miss. Clara nodded, her eyes grateful. I'll bring it to you tomorrow morning. Thank you, Miss Marple. As the guests retired for the night, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing room, her mind buzzing. Roland's agitation, Victor's planned escape, and Clara's doubts were threads in a tapestry she was weaving. She needed one final push to unravel Roland's scheme before the wedding day, and she had an idea. She found Lady Beatrice in the hall, adjusting a vase of lilies. Lady Beatrice, Miss Marple said, her voice low, might I have a word? It's about Clara's future. I have a small concern, but it requires your discretion. Lady. Beatrice's eyes widened, but she nodded. Of course, Jane. Let's speak in my sitting room. In the quiet of the sitting room, Miss Marple outlined her plan. I believe Roland may not be entirely forthcoming about his intentions, she said carefully. There's a way to test his sincerity. If we were to suggest that Clara's inheritance is tied up in a legal dispute, say, a challenge from a distant relative, it might reveal his true motives. A man in love would be disappointed, but steadfast. A man after money, well, he might react differently. Lady Beatrice frowned, her loyalty to Clara warring with her trust in Miss Marple's judgment. You think Roland is after her money, oh, Jane? That's dreadful. But I trust you. How do we proceed? Leave it to me, Miss Marple said. I'll plant the rumor tomorrow, before the wedding. If Roland panics, we'll know his heart. And if he doesn't, well, I'll be delighted to be wrong. As Miss Marple retired to her room, she felt the familiar thrill of a mystery nearing its climax. Roland was cornered, Victor was slipping, and Clara was beginning to see the truth. The rehearsal dinner had been a success not for its culinary delights, but for the cracks it had exposed in Roland's facade. She sat at her small desk, her notebook open, and jotted down her observations, Roland's reaction to Silver Thorngeld, Victor's plan to flee urgency, Clara's doubts hope. She closed the notebook and smiled. Tomorrow was the wedding day, and she was ready to set her trap. The net was tightening, and Roland Haverford, for all his charm, was about to find himself ensnared.